7 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So I'd like to welcome everyone to the January 2019 meeting of the Union Township Planning Commission, our first meeting of 2019. We've had Pledge Allegiance. I'll ask our Secretary Pro Tem to call the roll, please.
Cody.
Excuse.
Buckley.
Here.
Shingles.
Here.
Peter. Phil.
Here.
Webster.
Here.
Milky.
Here.
Darren here.
LaBelle here.
LaBelle here.
Okay. So those with hard to pronounce names were familiarized. What's that? Yeah, Fuller is excused or is not going to be here, and Cody is not going to be here. Okay. We last met on December 18th at an epic meeting, not to be missed. And you have minutes from the December 18th meeting. Are there any corrections to the December 18th minutes?
The place of the meeting shows Township Hall, right in the first sentence.
Yes, I think we should memorialize that it was held in a different location.
That was the only change I saw. I could not verify all the number of attendees that spoke or submitted writings. I'm assuming they're correct.
Right, that was quite a prodigious list. Thanks for assembling that. Any others? I thought the content was captured well and accurately from what I could see.
Motion to approve? Need a motion?
Yeah.
Motion to approve with the correction as needed.
Support.
So the motion is by Webster to approve the minutes with the minor correction of the location of the meeting, and the second was by Shingles or Buckley? Buckley. Further discussion? All in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so we have our minutes. Correspondence and board reports. Any correspondence not related to tonight's agenda?
I did have board, over the last time we've met, we've had our consultant still remains to be McKenna. Although we have had a change in people that will be working with us. Mike Dean was the name of the person that we had been working with. He's no longer with McKenna. He has moved on. And so our new contact person that will be working with us in the process is, his name is Christopher Duzin. Christopher has came up here tonight to introduce himself. I met with him earlier in the afternoon at the township, brought him up to speed. We talked about issues that we've been working on so far in the process, and so if it behooves the board, at this time I would like them just come to the podium and address the board, introduce himself.
I think that's fine.
Before I start, I come with a handout, as all good consultants should do. I look forward to working with you on the new zoning ordinance. I come to you with about 40 years of experience working in planning and zoning. I've worked on a number of zoning ordinances over the years. Most recently, I've done zoning ordinances for Lyon Township in Oakland County, Williamstown Township in Ingham County, Kalamazoo Township in Kalamazoo County, and Chickaming Township in Berrien County. And in my 40 years of experience, I've had the opportunity to work on a myriad of other planning projects ranging from master plans to market studies. I've worked on DDAs and tax increment financing, 425 agreements and annexation and a whole lot of other stuff. So I bring quite a bit of experience to the project, and I look forward to working with you. I've had the opportunity to work with Mike and meet with Mike before he left, so I have a pretty good idea of where you are in the process. And as Peter mentioned, we met for about an hour and a half this afternoon, and he brought me up to date on a number of things. In fact, in my letter here, I had a number of questions, and he was able to answer all those questions for me. So we saved an hour and a half of your time by meeting this afternoon. But attached to my letter is one of the key parts to the new zoning ordinance, and that's the annotated table of contents. And this is a very important document because what it does is set forth in detail all the sections of the new zoning ordinance. And next to each section, it indicates the existing section of the zoning ordinance that is going to be affected. So with any zoning ordinance, when you start on creating a new one, you can't just throw out the old one. There's too much history, too much culture that's embodied in that old zoning ordinance. And you just can't throw it out and start new. You have to respect what's in the old ordinance. And so you can see as we go through it how we're addressing what's in the old ordinance, how we're respecting that, incorporating it into the new ordinance, updating it, modifying it, changing it, or keeping it the same. And you'll also see, if you went through this whole table of contents, that we've addressed every section of the existing ordinance, so we're not leaving anything behind. You'll also see, as you go through this, that there's several new sections where we think that there's deficiencies in your existing ordinance, things that are not currently addressed that should be addressed, and so we're proposing new sections that should be addressed. And so this is a very complete outline. Obviously, as we go through it and we discuss things with you, it's going to be subject to modification, but in general, the general structure of the ordinance is right here before you right now. Now, as I said, Peter and I went through the questions and this afternoon, and he was very detailed and gave me very complete answers, and I was very happy for that. And I've gotten a lot of information from Mike. I've read through your master plan, which was very good. Obviously, you put a lot of work into that. And so I have a pretty good understanding of what your goals are for the township in the zoning ordinance, and I'm raring to go. So with that, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any brief questions for consultant?
Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Any other correspondence? Okay. So board reports. Clerk Cody is not here, so I gather we won't have a report from the Board of Trustees. ZBA.
ZBA was relatively quiet this week. We had one variance request, or this month, we had one variance requested that was denied by the ZBA. It was a sign ordinance for an additional freestanding sign on a property.
Okay. Sidewalks and pathways.
Since I was not at the last meeting, so I'm unable to report anything, and I don't know, Peter, if there's anything that
There
need to
wasn't
report?
really anything that dealt much with the planning commission. They approved their meeting schedule for 2019. They discussed looking into approving bylaws, rules for the committee, and an ongoing discussion of goals for the year.
Okay. Any other reports? Then we'll move on. So we've got approval of our agenda. Our agenda for tonight has 4 new business items, a public hearing on a special use permit application, a preliminary site plan review, a rezone request, which is a public hearing, and another site plan review. Is there anything?
I would note, Mr. Chair, the final item, the graphic X site plan, is actually the applicant has asked to postpone until next month.
Okay. So the proposal is to strike item C entirely, just wait till next month.
D.
D.
D, sorry. I was looking at D and I said C. Okay, so there's been a suggestion or a request to postpone item D. Is there any other business that needs to be discussed tonight? Is there a motion to approve our agenda with the modification that new business item D is omitted?
So moved.
Second.
So motion is by Webster, second by Shingles, to approve the agenda as amended. Further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so we have our agenda. Public comment. So for each planning commission meeting, we have a public comment section towards the beginning of the meeting. The public comment section at this time is for items that are not on tonight's agenda. So those who are here to speak on any of the public hearings will have that opportunity to do so at that time. We also have an extended public comment towards the end of the meeting on any issue, but this public comment is restricted to items that are not on tonight's agenda. If anyone would like to address the Planning Commission in that way, we ask you to give us your name and address for the minutes. If you're able to do so, stand at the podium and give us your comments from there. Otherwise, we can accept them from the audience, but we do ask you to give us your name and address for the minutes. Regular public comments open at 7:12. And seeing none, we'll assume people are here for other purposes, so we'll go ahead and close that back up. Despite the fact that we don't have an item 8 in our agenda, we'll move on to new business. We'll just let that be the mystery item. New business. Item A, special use permit application 2019-01, self-storage building expansion at some addresses on East Remus Road. The applicant is McGurk Mini Storage, Inc. And I'll turn this over to Peter to introduce the topic, and then we'll proceed to the public hearing.
Yeah, just to interject, Chair Squattrito, just want to, not sure if it's a conflict of interest. The applicant is a client of mine on items A, B, and C, so would the commissioners request me to remove myself, recuse myself from these topics?
When you say a client, what is that?
In the real estate business, so I have property listed for the client, for the applicant, I should say.
So I think our procedure is that the individual describes their predicament or their situation, and then we pass judgment on whether that either definitely represents a conflict of interest or would give the appearance of a conflict of interest.
Mr. Chair, and Doug can better answer this question. There is certain criteria that if you do fall under, it's just an automatic conflict of interest. A question would be, Commissioner Bell, would you have a business or financial interest in the property involved in the request, or has a business or financial interest in the applicant's company, agency, or association?
Only if I sell it for him.
So the intent is yes, though.
The intent is yes, so. Okay.
Sounds like I guess my question would be, are any of these properties currently for sale?
a portion of item letter Z, or sorry, C, that is, a portion of that is currently for sale. Yeah.
Under your listing?
Yes.
So it appears the consensus is that we're going to excuse you for those items. Okay. So now I'll turn it over to Peter to introduce the topic.
So tonight we will be holding two public hearings, one for a special use permit, the other for a rezoning application. Keep in mind, board, that these are two applications, almost two options to achieve one goal. Unless it has changed, it is under my understanding that the applicant is seeking an expansion of the business. They have two options, two directions they could go, and they're looking for approval on which one, but it's not looking for an approval on both to expand in both directions. This is a special use permit. It's an existing special use permit on the property to the, I guess, to the south and to the east of what is looking at for the expansion and the special use. Currently, there is a special use permit on that property for self-storage buildings. That project was that approval was approved in 2017. The applicant is looking to expand. They have provided a site plan showing where that expansion would be restricted to. And so it would only be on the portions of the property as shown. We have our criteria in section 30 that we will go through. There's also a specific section further in section 30 that deals with just requirements for self-storage buildings that we'll go over. The applicant has provided those sections and those criteria and given their thoughts and reasoning on why the application should be approved. So you have those to look through as well. But I just want you to keep in mind as we're going through this application to not completely separate the two items on the agenda, that we have the rezoning and the special use permit as completely two separate applications. That they are in essence two separate applications, but they're trying to achieve one goal, and that is the expansion of an existing self-storage business.
Okay. And the public hearing was duly advertised and
Noticed and to residents within 300 feet of the property.
okay. All right. So we'll do the public hearing on the special use permit application. I want to note that just a reminder that the applicant and the applicant's representative will have full opportunity to address the Planning Commission and respond to questions. So we're not really looking for their comments in the public hearing per se. Public hearing is really an opportunity for the public to address us and give their views on the project. So when I open the public hearing, anyone who wishes to address the application would, again, if you're able, come to the podium, give us your name and address for the minutes. Direct your comments to the Planning Commission, and we ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. The goal will be to give everyone who wants to speak an opportunity to speak. Once everyone who wants to speak has spoken, we'll consider whether we want to have to recognize individuals who've already spoken for additional comments.
Mr. Chair, I just have one procedural issue, which is something that I don't know is entirely clear, is that my client is not looking to do both A, B together and C. It's either or. You know, we understand that the Planning Commission may wish to see the development further to the south rather than to the north and west. I think that addresses the issue related to Mr. LaBelle. I don't know whether or not that changes his perspective or anyone else on the Planning Commissions. But if A and B are approved, then C will be withdrawn. So we would not be asking for rezoning of the area to the south if A and B is approved. I think that I heard Mr. LaBelle say that his issue is with respect to item number C. I don't know if that changes anything, but I thought I would offer that so that there's clarity for the commission.
Okay, we'll accept that as a clarification. Thank you. So with that, I will open the public hearing. Once again, if you want to address us, please make that known, and we'll be happy to receive your comments. So the public hearing on special use permit application 2019-01 is open at 7:20. Is there anyone who would like to address the Planning Commission on this application?
Jeremy Sheets. I live at 1740 Leroy Lane. I am in support of this project. The developer has a proven track record of putting very nice projects together. I live very close to this project, and I don't see any issues for me regarding this project. I think it would be a nice addition. And it would, there's definite need for more self-storage in this town, and this is a great spot for it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dave Coyne, I live at 1368 North Harris, Union Township. I've known the applicants for a long time. They do great work. Nice looking buildings. I think there's a need for the storage. I guess that's pretty much it.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Cheryl Hunter, and I'm at 500 East Meadowbrook. I live in Union Township, and I have businesses in Union Township. I can tell you that the McGurk family, anytime that they put a project together, it's first class. And I think anytime that we can capture some tax dollars for Union Township, it's a plus. And I'm sure that there's always a need for storage, and I welcome them to bring this project on. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Terry Somerville, and I'm representing Arboretum Apartments at 1810 Liberty Drive. In the original plan, the storage units were allowed with the woods being there to naturally screen them from public view. Well, the woods, that was one of the most beautiful in the area, was cut down with only a few left for some screening. This area was not meant to be zoned B5. Changing this to B5 highway would create more storage units and making it more industrial and hurting the local property values. This would be very unsightly and detrimental to the neighborhood. It seems like you give them an inch and they want to take a mile. How many variances and special use permits can one property ask for? We at Arboretum used to advertise quiet country living. This would change the neighborhood in a negative way. More signage would probably be added, causing light pollution and blight. Who wants to live next to an industrial area? We are against the special use permit and rezoning of this property.
Thank you.
I'm Scott Daigle. I live at 2910 Buckthorn, and I'm here as a resident of the Oaks neighborhood and a representative of the Oaks Neighborhood Association. And I'm here to speak in opposition to the proposals, and I have three reasons. The first is that, like was just mentioned, we don't want to live in an industrial park. We want to maintain a quiet neighborhood. The second is that the McGurks did not seem to be forthright with their plans and are rather using an incremental approach to expand the property piece by piece. And the third is that the McGurks have not really exhibited behavior consistent with the zoning requirements, have been forthright with this board. So the first is I don't want to live in an industrial park. There's noise, there's light pollution that we've already had to deal with. The incredibly bright sign, exhaust and other kinds of pollution will inevitably follow. We're going to have increased traffic because of what's going on now with the new proposal and what will probably and inevitably be coming in the future. The second part is they've not been forthright with their plan, so it becomes difficult to evaluate what the whole plan is. It's hard to either support or oppose it using this incremental approach. So as we just mentioned, we had a zoning plan last year. They've asked for a number of variances, and here we are again today asking for yet another one. This new plan creates a residential island bordered by the surrounding industrial park and then the road. It's pretty obvious, and it's inevitable, that those properties will be devalued and easily acquired by the works and will become part of the expansion. And then there will be nothing on the south side of Remus Road as they expand ever more westward. And that will start to affect our neighborhood. The third is that the McGurks do not have a history of abiding by the decisions of this board or by the rules. For example, there is still an enormous dirt pile on the facility long after construction has been done in that part of the area. They've asked for a number of waivers with the signs. They need an ever larger sign. That was in the minutes noted today. I'm not sure why they can't have a regular size sign. The sign that was up there, the digital sign, was incredibly bright. It took months to have it. The brightness of the sign diminished to a reasonable amount before it was a nuisance or even a hazard to that intersection. And I don't need to mention, but I will, the pole barn near Riverwood. Whether that was abiding by the zoning requirements or not, I guess I'll leave that to you. We asked this board to reject the rezoning proposal. We want to maintain a quiet neighborhood. The people live in this community. It's not just about the businesses. I appreciate what the McGurks do. They're obviously invaluable economic engine within this community, but we live in an area that is currently zoned for residents, and we want to maintain that.
My name is Vance Johnson. I reside at 7777 South Whiteville. I'm here on behalf of the Fisher companies that have properties in this area. I think that the McGurks have done a very nice looking job developing the property that's there. I think it's an enhancement to the area over what was there previously. I think that this is a good use of the property. As far as the storage, there's a big need for additional storage, and they've got good screening. They've got a good looking project. Ultimately, the same developer, they're going to own property on 3 sides of it, so they have the biggest impact on themselves of anyone. We support the project.
Thank you.
My name is Andrea Andre. I live at 1517 Shagbark. I'm also part of the Oak subdivision, and we're relatively new to that subdivision, but would prefer that it maintain its residential feel and would like to express the opposition to rezoning at this time.
Jeff Sweet, 2112 Cobblestone Court, Union Township. I'm in here in support of the project. I think it'll provide a lot of value. It's a needed resource with more storage. The current facility is a beautiful facility that's already brought new jobs to the area and expanded other businesses with other uses that will help the surrounding area with another closer dining area and stuff. And the storage units will be a good-looking buildings. They always have been at their Pickard Street location. They are good-looking buildings. I wouldn't expect anything less here on M20 State Highway. So, in support of it.
Thank you.
Keith Connor, 777 Stone Ridge. I'm in support of the project as well. I like what's happened so far. I definitely can see the frustration of a project this size is going to take a while, so I'm sure there's going to be more construction. I'm happy to see Mitchell's come into this space that has been vacant for all of my adult life that I can remember. And then I'm happy to see a new restaurant's coming in. I just heard on a newspaper, which is pretty close to where I live, so I'm pretty excited about that. I'm also happy about the potential future I see on the drawings up there, those houses. I've been in those houses along that street, if you can call them houses. They're not savable. They're complete garbage, and they're overrun by raccoons. So to see the potential that that could turn into commercial, I see that as a huge benefit. And I'm in real estate myself, similar to Mr. LaBelle, and the need for storage is big. People move all the time, and people don't want to store their stuff far away from where they want to go. There's a lot of folks moving out into Union Township, Deerfield Township, and this would give them a closer area to store their items while they're waiting. People can't buy 2 houses at once and move seamlessly anymore. They usually renting something temporarily and storing all this stuff in the interim, so, I'm definitely in support, thanks.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Billy Willis. I just purchased property at 92 East Remus Road, and I thought now would be a good time for me to speak just because it kind of piggybacks off of what the gentleman was just talking about. We currently are in the city limits on Center Drive. We're a family of 9. We bought, that in and of itself is something, but we bought the property out here on M20, and that very example that he was speaking about really kind of hits us. We're in a situation right now where we've got to get out of the other house, but we're trying to remodel the new one, and it's kind of a selfish point, I guess, but if there was some storage there that was available, at least in our particular situation, that would be great, because it's right on the way. So that's kind of a selfish point, but that's kind of the piece that I wanted to bring to it. And the building, I don't know everything about what goes on there, but it's a beautiful building in my perspective, and you know, the stuff about the sign and things like that, not something that I notice on my day-to-day travel, but could just be daydreaming. So anyway, thank you. I am in support of it.
Thank you. I'm looking around the room. I almost feel like everyone has spoken. Any other folks who wish to make a public comment? Were there any written correspondence on this one? No? Okay. Public comment going once? Going twice? All right. Well, thanks very much. We really thank the public for their comments on this application. So we'll go ahead and close the public comment at 7:32. And unless Peter has anything else you want to add, I'll let the applicant or the applicant's representative give us their introduction to what they want to do on this particular one. Okay. The floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is Joseph Quant. I'm an attorney for the applicant, and my address is 412 South Union in Traverse City. I also have an office here in Mount Pleasant at the Remus Road location that the McGurks have. Tim Beebe is our site plan engineer. Tim's going to talk a little bit about some of the site plan attributes and some of the efforts that the applicant is undertaking to try to address some of the various issues. But I did want to respond to a couple of the comments and points that were made during public comment. First of all, somebody said that this wasn't meant to be B5 zoning. It is B5 zoning. It's not only B5 zoning on this parcel, it's also B5 zoning on the parcel that's right in front of the Oaks. So saying that this is somehow an unanticipated change, I don't know how that could be possible. If you bought land knowing what the zoning was, we're not asking for rezoning and we're not asking for a variance. We don't have a history of asking for rezoning or a variance. We never asked for a variance to begin with, so I don't think that those characterizations are accurate or fair. Number 2, signage. No additional signage is being requested. You know, the signage is what it is, and there's no additional request for additional signage as part of this project. It's important to remember that this project, when it was initially proposed, looked at the current projected demand of what self-storage would need. The response to this has been overwhelming, and that we wouldn't be building additional infrastructure to support this need if the need wasn't there based upon the market. So my clients are simply just responding to the public's demand and the public's request that this additional use be facilitated. This seems to be a perfect spot for it. It's already surrounded. It's already zoned for future commercial use. It's surrounded on 3 sides by property that my client either owns or will own based upon this proposal. They're really the ones who are most heavily impacted. There's going to be extensive screening of conifers, which are placed 15 feet on center, as is required under the ordinance. So a lot of the concerns about buffering potential, I don't think you could even see it from the Oaks, from the exit onto M20 from the Oaks. So I think that a lot of those issues will be addressed through those mechanisms that are already required in the ordinance. Exhaust, I mean, I can't imagine what exhaust comes from a storage building. I mean, they have limited, utilities. There's no internal heating, ventilation, or air conditioning systems. There will not be any exhaust. I don't know how that could be a concern. Not being forthright, I mean, actually that's almost insulting. The McGurks have been completely forthright in everything that they've undertaken here. They've asked for nothing that isn't something that isn't already lawfully provided for in your ordinance. They've been completely candid in their responses. I'm, once again, I'm kind of at a loss for how to address something where not a specific factual allegation has been made with respect to their not being forthright. History of noncompliance. Once again, I'm kind of at a loss for what the noncompliance issue is. There are no outstanding violations. There was an issue of concern related to the sign, and they have dramatically decreased the luminescence of that sign. Now is only 8% of its capacity. When the sign was first put up, we recognized the fact that it was a concern to the community. They have taken significant efforts to try to reduce the luminosity of that lighted billboard. They're willing to continue to take a look at it, but it is in no way a violation of the ordinance. So that's not an issue. With respect to the dirt pile, as you know, that's the dirt pile of topsoil that had to be screened on site. It's now being taken off site. It'll be removed soon. I think the township's established a deadline for compliance to have the dirt pile removed, and the dirt pile will be completely removed within that deadline. So I think that those are the general issues, or actually all the issues that I remember being addressed as being a concern. I'm already stealing your thunder. I'm going to let Tim talk a little bit about the site plan elements, and then I'd like to talk again a little bit more about the actual factual basis of support and legal basis of support for the application.
Peter, do you need your it's either that or I'm gonna stay up. Okay, I'm a little more calm now. I don't have as much thunder in my voice. I'll try and speak up so that you can hear me. The project, you'll see a line coming across here, and if I wasn't shaking, maybe I could get it straight across. There is a legal description which is being proposed for the expansion of the existing special use. It does not go all the way up to the roadway. The B5 is not across the entire lands that are looking at being purchased. You'll notice that this area is being still proposed as standard B5 type structures. We orientated those in order to provide as much screening as possible. That is not part of what you're reviewing tonight, but it shows that there's sufficient land left to provide a buffering B5 zoning for that. This piece of property, although it's currently in use as residential, it is also zoned B5. But because it's currently used as residential, we have buffering all the way around it. There is a section in the ordinance that specifically dictates what you must plant, the spacing, the height, when dealing with self-storage. The plan has been prepared in compliance with that section. This section of the buildings are built. These are under construction. These will be built over the next year. And why are we here? Because we're looking for the next spot to go. Instead of dropping a different location and having self-storage in multiple locations, we're looking at concentrating in one. It helps with, obviously, the security. And again, in the C of your agenda tonight, we're looking at a rezoning down here, and there is a map that shows how this same expansion of buildings could fit down on this piece of property. So basically, as Representative Attorney, or Applicant's Attorney stated, we're basically giving two options. We can expand in line with these and continue the process, expand into the adjacent parcel this way, which is also zone B5, and so is the parcel to the west of that. This is zone B5 all the way out to the borderline, which is past the Oaks. We're talking about, residential properties in this area. There are no residential properties from where the current development is on both sides of the lower road all the way to the corner. So I believe that we've submitted a plan which addresses all the aspects of zoning. It's in compliance with all the items. We have gone through and obtained all the outside reviews, which, Peter, you have this listed as a preliminary?
That's what the plan stated on the plan. It states, and I wasn't sure if at one point it was preliminary and then supposed to be final. I believe the application said final and the plan said preliminary.
Don't be preliminary site plans until they're approved.
Okay.
So we are asking for final. I do have all the approvals from all the outside agencies. And Peter has copies of all of those. We have gone through with the fire department, looking at fire hydrant placement, access, how the property would be fenced and gated and secured. We've talked with the DPW director, making sure that water can be extended, proper locations. There's no issue with that. We've dealt with Isabella County Drain Commission, who does your reviews for stormwater. We have complied with all of those requirements and have provided additional detention. So at this point, we believe that we've met all the quantification checklists for the project, and we're hoping that you have read through the items and how we've addressed the items that you need to address for every special use. And with that, I'll turn it back to Joe, and he can go over those.
Great, thank you. Once again, this development has been an iterative process. When the McGurks originally were looking at this property, they did not have an initial intention to build more self-storage. The demand's been unprecedented. Clearly, there's a need for it. They're just trying to find the most attractive way to present it and the best location on their property or on the property that they can immediately acquire in which to place it. That's why we had the rezone in front of you at the same time as the SUP amendment, so that you could basically choose where you'd rather see this. If the desire is to see it to the south, the property, the master plan contemplates that area as commercial and industrial, or as commercial/industrial under your future land use map. So that may be an appropriate place for it to be, but that is zoned R3, which means that we would have to rezone in order to accomplish that goal. Or we can accomplish that goal through the purposes that we've established here, which is an SUP amendment. And as you know, under Section 4 of your ordinance, amendments are permitted. It's my understanding that they're fairly common for SUP amendments in our discussions with Peter. And under Section 30 of your ordinance, there is the quantified elements that are required to be satisfied by the applicant as part of the process. So I'd like to, as we're making a record here, I'd just like to run through those fairly briefly. I try to present these things in a way that that make it easy for you, one way or the other, so that you have facts in front of you, because as you know, you're required to support your findings with appropriate facts. So we try to make these facts readily apparent in the kind of document that I presented. I hope that they're helpful for you. With respect to item number 1, the special use shall be designed, constructed, operated, and maintained in a manner harmonious with the character of adjacent property in the surrounding area. And keep in mind that under the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act, the focus of the analysis is not on what adjoining property is being used for, but what it's zoned for. Clearly, this is all zone B5 commercial. It's been B5 commercial for a long, long time. I don't think that there's any surprises to anybody about the fact that the commercial corridor along M20 was slated for that purpose. So essentially what the analysis is this use harmonious with other commercial uses? And certainly it's harmonious with the use to the south because that is self-storage. It's harmonious to the east because that's my client's surrounding commercial development. Eventually, the frontage along M20 is going to be other commercial development, probably retail or something similar to that. But you will eventually have buildings in front of, along that frontage area that will be commercial in nature. So it will be screened on 3 sides by conifers or by my client's other project. It'll be screened from the road frontage from other commercial development. You're not even going to see this. Once the additional commercial activity is undertaken along the frontage of M20, you won't even see these buildings. Because as you know, they're low profile. They are, I think, for self-storage buildings, they're attractive considering their setting. But nonetheless, we're providing as much screening as we possibly can to try to make this as harmonious with surrounding land uses as we can. Let's see, with respect to item number 2, the special use shall not change the essential character of the surrounding area. This may be a little bit of rehash, but clearly the surrounding area already has significant commercial development both across the street, all the way to the east, and now the natural progression is to move the project to the west. And again, the applicable analysis in the Zoning Enabling Act is to compare the proposed use with the character of the surrounding area as contemplated in the zoning ordinance and the master plan. And your master plan does contemplate commercial for this property and for the adjoining properties, both to the west and to the east and to the north for that matter. The SUP is completely consistent with the community's expectations as reflected in the master plan. I've attached an appendix that compares the project to the master plan elements as required that I think will be helpful to look at. The master plan stated desires to accommodate residential rental property. Well, I think close to 80 to 90% of the people who utilize the self-storage are residential customers who just simply don't have a place to be able to store their personal belongings, which drives the demand for this type of land use. Under number 3, the special use shall not interfere with the general enjoyment of adjacent property. Again, the properties to the north, east, and south are either zoned commercial or zoned or are surrounded by property that's owned by my client. And further, the enjoyment of adjacent property will not be affected because it's screened with decorative wall to the south, green space plantings to the east and the west, and also to the south. And then on top of that, you're going to have other commercial infill that's going to happen along the frontage and Ravens Road. Number 4, the special use shall not be hazardous to adjacent property or involve uses, activities, materials, or equipment that will be detrimental to the health, safety, or welfare of persons or property through the excessive production of traffic, noise, smoke, odor, fumes, or glare. Well, there's very little with respect to self-storage that produces any of those noted items. These facilities will all have downcast night sky lighting. They will not have large lighting fixtures. There'll be no additional signage. There is no internal mechanical, so there's no additional fumes or anything else. There's nothing hazardous that can be stored within the buildings. A lot of those issues as with respect to that specific item are going to drop. request. Let's see, number 5, the special use shall be adequately served by essential public facilities. As Tim's already noted, we've already received all the necessary approvals. It will be connected to necessary public facilities where appropriate. It provides, obviously, for additional revenue stream for the township with respect to those facilities. So we feel that certainly essential public facilities are being provided within the context of the design. Number 6, when deemed necessary by the Township Board or Planning Commission, use shall be adequately screened by distancing landscaping to protect the rights of all adjoining property. Once again, we've done our very, very best to try to come up with appropriate screening that protects the interests of surrounding landowners and to make this as unobtrusive as we can. But once again, keeping in mind that this is a commercial project, it is commercial property, it is specifically contemplated within the B5 zoning district. Number 7, the Township Board of Planning Commission, in connection with approval of any application, will require a reasonable undertaking by the applicant to guarantee and assure by agreement, including a performance bond to be posted by the applicant or by some other reasonable surety arrangement at appropriate stages of the plan development, that the development will be executed in accordance with the approved plan. This is not a phase plan. This is all going to be built as one project. So I don't think that any kind of financial assurance mechanism is necessary or appropriate, but we're certainly willing to address any specific concerns or needs of the township with respect to financial assurance. Number 8, that such use will be an asset to the township. Clearly this will be an asset because it fulfills a public need with well-managed, aesthetically pleasing, secure storage. It accommodates high density residential uses in the area, which are typically bereft of storage that's available to them because of the size of high density residential. The tax base will be significantly increased, and the project will provide additional use and funding resources for other public services. Now, with respect to the additional conditions that apply just to self-storage facilities, as you know, we've got sufficient elements to satisfy under Section 30 of the ordinance. Number 1, it has to be clear that the special use being requested is allowed as provided in the B4, B5 districts. Clearly, when you look at the delineated uses by right or uses by permit that are permitted under B5, self-storage is one of those defined uses. Number 2, provided they shall be architecturally designed so as not to have a flat roof and shall instead have a mansard, gable, hip, or gambrel roof design. I think you all have a photo of the elevation views that show the existing storage buildings, and they do comply the new buildings will look exactly like those other buildings and will comply with that requirement. And number 3, provided they meet all required conditions of the B4 or B5 zone with respect to site plan. I think that Tim has covered that, but we will certainly address any other concern that the Planning Commission has with respect to that item. Be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Are there questions for the applicant, either Mr. Quant or Mr. Beebe?
So clarity for myself, this is a preliminary site plan that we're making a decision on. I'm sorry.
We have
first.
We have an SUP first. As the applicant stated, the plan says preliminary. Their application they had marked final. We do have all outside agency approvals, and so we could treat this as a final site plan. The application, it's in your packet. You'll see that it's marked final site plan. But and so we can look at that in conjunction with the SUP. The SUP requires a site plan, and so after the SUP, we do have a site plan in front of us.
But I guess my point is, they're asking for us to look at 2 options, bullet A and B together, and then C. Is that right, or are you asking us to
I think they're saying that
take it in order?
Actually, under your ordinance, you need to take them in order. The
And
special
give
use-
us, and
the
we're
special
just
use
having an
permit needs to
option.
be acted upon first. The site plan is presented as a final site plan because we've gone that extra step and extra
Mhm.
effort to get all the necessary approvals. So that's second. And then number 3 is only if, you know, if the first plan has been rejected, then we would move on to the rezoning request. But if the special use permit is recommended for approval, we would withdraw the rezoning request for the property to the south.
But we have every right to look at the site plan because it's required by the SUP.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
So I get, or just to help it, and I'm clarified, although it's presented as two options, the applicant has a preference in the SUP, and that's why it's being presented first?
That's correct. Clearly, you know, we've gone through the extra effort of having the additional site plan expense undertaken, getting the additional approvals, you know, which is not a minimal undertaking because we wanted you to have as complete of an application as we could so that you could act upon it if you feel compelled to do so.
So they're not really asking us which one we desire. It's, we're gonna take it in order and chips fall where they are. So it's not really, do you like the location of option B? It's special use permit, site plan review, and you don't even look at option 2.
Well, I guess they've chosen to tell us that they are gonna pursue that option if the first option is not.
So a better way to put it, they'll pursue that option if.
That's the way I understand what I've heard.
Yes.
So it's not option, which one do you like better, which I had heard earlier just in comments, it's.
Well, it kind of isn't. It isn't. I don't want you to look at either one in a vacuum of the other. I want you to know that we know the demand is there. You know, we want to facilitate whatever land use objectives are important to the community. That's why we said we think this fits best. This is the shoe that fits best. If this shoe doesn't work for you, then we'll go to, you know, shoe number 2 if that's what we have to do. But I wanted you to be able to look at both plans in context. I understand that your analysis has to look at each one based upon its own merits, but I did want you to know that we're not asking for both.
Just to clarify then, I think it's obvious at this point, but I just want to clarify it. So what you've got colored in black here is what exists, what's been approved.
What's been approved.
Now, how many, I count that there's 3 of the buildings have been built, is that right?
And the 4th platform.
I'm sorry?
The footings and the platform, the cement platform has been built for the 4th.
For the 4th? Okay. Last time I was out there, I saw the 3. Okay. Why are the buildings heading west beyond what's been approved? Why are they a little bit narrower? Just because that's what fits?
They fit better. They also provide a different size storage. So.
Other questions for the applicant? I mean, I'm sure they're obviously not going anywhere, so if we move to deliberations and we have further questions, we can ask them, but they still have the floor, so if there are questions, they welcome to be asked at this time.
I just have one other question, which I'm having trouble whether or not it's part of the special use permit, but it's also site plan, so forgive me, I'm just asking. So there's the future development along the road, which is not part of this, so assume it's not there. It's commercial.
The intent
Or it's, sorry,
was
business.
to show that there's sufficient room.
Good, thank you. So are we requiring that there's also going to be screening along Business District 20 until that is developed?
That would be an option of yours as the special use. We are to screen, this is B5 to B5. There isn't a requirement for
Right.
that screening.
Although as an SUP, you can require it.
Right,
Yeah.
good, thank you. And I'm just trying to let them speak their turn, but I'm also trying to address concerns until along the roads developed, with commercial screening, so.
And actually, so I can more completely answer your question, that exact question is something that Chuck and I talked about just before the meeting. He's willing to do the conifer screening all the way along the north perimeter of the SUP. To address that concern about what you see until the infill happens along the twin.
The buildings up there that you've shown, they're marked proposed, but I understand it's conceptual, so you're not actually planning to build them.
No, that's.
Based on the dimensions and just based on what I'm seeing on the paper, I envision that as basically strip mall style.
Could be anything from, we see medical arts buildings that size, that width for office space. That size building fits a lot of different uses.
Okay. But sort of, it could be a long, narrow building, but it could also be divided into storefronts.
Right.
Okay, all right.
Some interest has already been expressed with respect to potential restaurant use of that.
Mm. Other questions for the applicant?
Is there enough parking there for a restaurant if following the,
Not with the current layout.
yeah, with the layout that you have?
With the current layout.
Right, but the current layout, the purpose of that was to show that it was screening the buildings.
The purpose was to show that there's sufficient development room to put that size of building with that type of parking for office or retail.
Not as a screen of the
Any
mini
building,
storage.
any building, anything that's built there will act as screening. How will the buildings be done? When the person comes.
But if you were
with
to
the site
put a
plan.
restaurant in there with the proper parking spots, screening's gonna be very different than illustrated.
Well, I'd have to count how many parking spots are out.
That's why I asked if you had done anything with that.
Not specifically.
Okay.
But if you count the parking spaces out there and you figure one space for every 3 seats, you're probably going to be able to have,
I just didn't know if you'd gone through that exercise, Tim.
There's probably 45 to 50 parking spaces. That's a pretty good sized restaurant. One space for every 3 seats.
Well, and the conifer screen would remain in place for any area where there's not a building to serve for that screen purposes. And if you wanted to make that a condition of approval, we're more than happy to concede that.
How many in the 3 existing buildings and the ones that are going up there, the wider ones, how many individual storage units are in each of those buildings?
200 feet long.
What's that?
They're 200 feet long.
Which ones?
The ones that you're building right now.
I think they're 220, I think they are.
220?
And I think
Pat's
the other
nodding
ones
her
are
head.
150.
So you have 10 foot on the ends that have small door style, and then you have 20 with 2 sides, so that's 40 plus 4, 48 per building of different sizes.
Okay. That's this we're looking at?
Yes, sir.
And behind buildings,
So 48 per building. And I see 8 of those size buildings. Now, if you ended up not being able to expand to the west, you've got one that's straddling
Mhm.
the 2. That one just doesn't get built, or what?
If we, yeah, right now, the what's approved is the larger buildings coming across.
First aid.
Yep.
Okay.
And the development ends there at that property line.
But something that's important to remember is that our agreement with the current owner is that we have to buy all three or none. So it's kind of an all or nothing proposition.
You have to buy all three.
All three parcels that are involved here.
Okay.
So building to the north and not to the west is really not an option for us.
Yeah, it's actually all four. There's three pieces in that portion plus the 10-acre plus parcel over here. And we're having to take it all, we're having to purchase all the way back to the 8th line, even though it's not zoned.
So don't you need to go through, if that were approved, joining those parcels for setbacks?
Yeah, yeah.
But that's not
That's
applied for here.
It's applied for through your assessor. It's not applied for.
Correct, correct.
So that's.
Has that been at least
We don't-
initiated?
We don't even own the property.
Yeah.
So you can't join the property.
No, I understand.
That would be contemplated though.
But if we're looking at a site plan, don't we need to see those property boundaries?
Property boundaries are shown as they currently exist today.
But I don't think we can approve a site plan, correct? That, Peter, we've had to join properties before we could approve building across property lines. We had to do that on Remus and Bradley.
We did that out, I think we did that out north of Pickard too, in the industrial
Right.
section out there.
Well, that creates an interesting issue, that's a chicken and egg problem. You know, you can't present a
Well,
site.
I understand. I'm just saying that in those cases, we had to have them apply and get approval so that we could, we did it contingent upon.
And
In
so
one case, I think.
I think what you could still do is you could, if you're were to approve, you could put a condition that the properties be combined. I mean, they'd have to,
Contingency for that.
you know, they have to.
It would be unusual for the assessor to deny that, I would think. I don't think I've seen that happen.
I think there's grounds.
But I guess what I'm saying is, if we were to move forward, I want to see that contingency put in place, that
Yeah,
parcels be drawn properly.
yeah, we could have a condition, yeah, and I could be wrong, but I believe we have had projects before where we have placed a condition that, where there was needed a combination that we've made that
That's all I'm
requirement.
suggesting.
The only site plan that I can remember that was tabled because it had to be joined prior was where both parcels were owned by the same person already. And the one that I'm thinking of was Shingles in the industrial park. Eichenau.
Mhm.
Eichenau owned both pieces of property. We're told to join them and then come back.
And it happened with merchandise outlet, too.
But that's only been in the case where the applicant already owns the property.
So just to so I understand, the three parcels are the one to the, directly to the north, the top half of this one, and then the
No.
R1 is a separate parcel?
This
No?
would be, in,
That's
That
This
whole
would be
thing,
one.
that whole thing is one,
but
okay.
they're not gonna be using the entire piece.
Right, I understand that.
And that has dual zoning on it,
This,
correct?
this is a, and this is a second parcel, a third
Oh,
parcel,
okay, all
and
right.
then
A
a fourth
fourth
parcel
parcel.
here.
Oh, there's four?
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
And then there is this parcel that there's an existing non-conforming
Yeah.
residential home that's not part of the development,
Right.
so.
And you're saying you have to buy all of them?
Yes,
Alright.
the agreements are all tie-bar.
4 parcels then?
Yes. Yeah, there's
Okay,
actually
'cause I thought
three.
you said you'd buy 3.
I thought it was 3. I
Oh,
thought
okay,
it was
it's 4?
4.
Okay.
It's actually, it's 3 entities, but one entity owns 2 parcels. So, my apologies.
Thank you.
All right. Other questions for the applicant?
Just one point of clarification, Chuck just reminded me of something, which is, he's willing to do the screening all the way across across the north perimeter line, just with a caveat that if the fire department says that they need some area in there to access, that be part of, an understanding that area would not have trees in front of it, that the fire department would be able to get in there for circulation.
When the next development to the north, fire department may want that drive. You see how the parking comes through? Now move to the east. Whoop, there, see the drive that goes through? That was something that may be required, is another access in for fire access. So that-
Only if buildings were put in there, correct, Tim?
Right, we would preserve
Yeah.
as much of the screening as we can.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
Understanding that there are other
that was
agencies
one of the comments that,
Or if there's back
Rick-
doors to the buildings.
Yeah.
'Cause you can't
Makes
have
sense.
tree up against the back door.
So, not that we're looking at the future expansion, but that driveway off of 20 would be the main entrance to the,
there will be a main entrance off M20. Is it there? Is it in the middle of the property? I can't tell you. Will it be joined to the properties to the east? Yes, for internal access. So that the traffic patterns that are in what is already built can be utilized, gets you out to the private road, can take you all the way over to Lincoln Road. So the idea is to link everything together. Now, the parcel that you see on the far west, talking with the fire department, they may want to see that drive in another gate at that point. So that wouldn't necessarily, that comes in, and then there's a drive around the west side of the building. There you go. Peter, you doing that? Yeah. Okay. I was trying to figure out.
His hand's not shaking.
I know. Mine was. But the drive coming to that was trying to deal with some of the comments that we had from the fire department.
okay, but no development above what we talked about as the north line, so no drives. And I'm jumping a little bit ahead just but for clarification. Right now, the access is from
Access
current
is
paved
actually
lot.
from the rear coming in,
Yep.
yes.
Okay. And that's gonna feed the special use permit, and that's what you're saying you got approval from, okay.
Yes. The special use permit does not include any of the land 200 feet south of M20.
Other questions for the applicant? If you were to buy this property and you own the property that's to the north, correct me if I'm wrong, but there'd be nothing to prevent you from coming back in a year and making a request to expand the special use to do the same thing to the north. Is that correct?
Does the ordinance permit you to make that request? Yes, I would think that we'd be talking about an entirely different kettle of fish, building self-storage buildings right up into the right of way. And besides that, the land's too valuable to use for that. That land has a much higher value to be used for other mixed commercial uses rather than self-storage.
Other questions? I do want to point out that once we move to deliberation phase, if we have questions for the applicant's representatives, we'll let you know, but I don't intend to recognize them for further comments. So this is both your last opportunity and our last opportunity, but we reserve the right to ask further questions if we need to. Are we good?
I have one question. I'll
Please.
ask it now just because the door's still open. It's really more for Peter, but if we review item A, and let's say that item A is we decline recommendation on that. Item C is a rezone. I understand that that's separate. Item C is a rezone. But is there also not a special use that would need to be requested for that rezone
If the
at a future date?
Yeah,
then?
if the rezone, if the special use was recommended for denial and the applicant did not choose to withdraw the item C, we would move forward with the rezoning, and we'd have the public hearing, we'd go through the process, and if that one is ultimately approved, yes, they would have to come back at a later time for a special use permit at that location.
So essentially, if item A were recommended for denial, then item B would essentially be withdrawn, would be moved. Okay. Okay. That was just a clarification on how that worked.
Okay. So are we ready to move on? Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
So we have to go down the list. It's already been read. I don't know. Should I read it again? You think I should read it again? All right. So we'll read the criteria that we need to use, and we will give our comments on it and see where we stand. Number one, the special use shall be designed, constructed, operated, and maintained in a manner harmonious with the character of adjacent property and the surrounding area.
I would agree that it would be harmonious with the adjacent properties.
Other thoughts?
I think it's difficult to disagree that it wouldn't be harmonious immediately with the adjacent. Where I struggle a little bit is if I think across the road, I don't know that I necessarily agree with across the road. Understanding that development may come along the roadside, which is obviously a use by right. I'm a little torn about that.
Number two, the special use shall not change the essential character of the surrounding area.
This is the one that stood out for me. And it really is because of the master plan. When you look at the master plan, it's identified as commercial light industrial. As you read through what that is, it doesn't really apply to mini storage, which is allowed by use, right to use in industrial, and a special use in B5 and B4. I don't think it's conducive to the traveling person on the highway. I mean, mini storage is not something that people want on the road front. I didn't support the original mini storage when the SUP was before us. In fact, this planning commission denied that special use initially when it was before us. It was the board of trustees that later overturned that. And I felt there's other places that mini storages could be in our township, not along a vibrant, what I hope is a vibrant commercial corridor for retail, more retail business. Light industrial is identified as like R&D, much businesses that you might find in technology park or retail. I don't see this as that type of business.
Just to clarify what that light industrial is on the future land use map, it's light industrial uses include but are not limited to small-scale manufacturing, laboratories, R&D firms, information technology firms, or other businesses that might be found in a technology park. That's the full description of the master plan. I find it difficult, and I don't know if it's out of turn here to talking about the rezoning. It's difficult for me to look at this and say, I tend to agree with that sentiment. I tend to agree with the notion that my concern is when we talk about out of character is that I still question what businesses, if we're talking about a restaurant, does a restaurant is there a disincentive that's created for a potential business if they're locating immediately in front of a mini storage? I don't know. What it's difficult for me to, when I'm considering this, is that I have not yet seen the space that's proposed to the south. And we can't talk about that, or I don't, maybe we can talk about it, but that's, I mean, that's later in the agenda. I know that we're supposed to keep this separate, but I'd kind of like to see both, you know, at least what the property is.
I had similar thoughts in that if this was approaching to the south, that I'd be more amenable to it, because we're not taking away what would be a highly commercial district. And even the applicant mentioned that's prime property up front. I question what kinds of businesses would be limited by the narrow frontage that's there. So I struggle with it, because I think it does change the essential character when the master plan talks about the essential character being commercial corridor, not these industrial uses that typically are seen in more industrial zones, outside or behind commercial developments, right? And what we have now, at least what's currently being built, there's enough buffer between that and the economic corridor, the commercial corridor, for reasonable development.
I do have that plan. I don't know if it jumps the gun.
Is it inappropriate to look at
to take, I guess,
what that looks like?
You know, we're not going to review it, but
about this?
I mean, I can let you guys, I have it on screen. You can take a look at what that, unless that would be inappropriate.
I'm asking the board. I don't know if it is appropriate to look at that in conjunction with this or not.
Well, what's being asked, I guess, though, is this special use expansion, right?
Mhm.
But don't make a decision in a vacuum, I heard.
Right.
That's what I mean, that's what I'm trying to say, because I can say this when we're talking about, I lump it in with item 1 and 2, but we talk about, you know, the surrounding, the adjacent area, the surrounding character, changing the character. My concern lies with the frontage, and my concern lies with ensuring that we can bring in we can attract the type of business that the applicant is discussing, but also that we feel confident we can get. And and I agree, I mean, when we had the initial discussion about the self-storage, I wasn't supportive of the mini storage that's there. The fact of the matter is that it is there now, and I'm probably, if I'm looking at an application for both of those, it's easier for me to make a justification on the south side than on the north side when we're talking about character and adjacent property.
May I jump in, too?
Yeah.
I think when I looked at this, too, the expansion to the west didn't bother me as much. It was the expansion to the north.
Correct.
Because of what you just said.
Although they've mentioned that it's an all or nothing purchase of the
Yep.
properties. So does
I'm
the rest of the board have?
I'm just going to throw this out there. I think from our conversation earlier with Tim, I don't know if the potential future development, you wonder what the West DDA is thinking they'd love to bring in, because I think we'd all like to see development to the west. But if we let them expand to the north, are we limiting the size or the possibilities of what could be built along that corridor? You know, is the developer going to be limited to what they can put there?
I think you're completely limiting it.
I think it's entirely limited.
Right.
And I think there's a visibility issue. I mean, if we talk about, well, all right, well, if you flip the coin and there's commercial development that potentially could go in to the south or somewhere further in, how much, I mean, the purpose of the B5 zoning is to service people coming off the highway and having access off the highway and being able to see it and being readily utilized. And if we're talking about, you know, if we're looking at it from the master plan standpoint and we're talking about the type of use, I think it's unfortunate that we even call it light industrial there, because it's not really what the description is called, or that's not what the description calls for. But it makes me wonder if we're kind of really departing from that B5 zoning if we're putting something, self-storage, that close to the roadway.
think that's why I was referencing the master
Yeah.
plan, because
Right.
it speaks to a commercial corridor there.
Right.
So I guess in response to question 2, I don't think it changes the essential character. I just think we don't like where it's going. It doesn't change the character because it's consistent with what's already there. Because I just heard somebody say it's not about what's being built; it's where it's located. So if it were to the south, then it seems like there's favorable support for it because it's in front of what's existing. I know the impacts that it could potentially have on the commercial property on the frontage, but that's not the question here. The question is about the essential character. The essential character has already been established by virtue of what was approved by the Board of Trustees, because essentially it sounds like this body, which I wasn't on it.
Well, I think you could make the case that the character is changed. If we're looking about flexibility for what we would consider use by right, B5 use, then yes, you are changing specifically what can and cannot be done on the roadway, based on by virtue of this, how much space you have left. So I suppose from where I sit, if it's not appropriate right now to put up the southern parcel to look at that and what that might look like in conjunction with this, I guess just as a board member, I can tell you that I'm much more resistant to this special use than I am what's being discussed to the south. I'm willing to consider putting in mini storage there. I know we don't have a special use in front of us for that, but I'm far less resistant to that than I am the road frontage.
I would have to agree with Mr. Shingles, Commissioner Shingles, I don't see that this is, the question is the essential character of the surrounding areas. I don't see it. It's not changing it. If I would go to the where R3 is, and then we have to ask rezoning, I believe that is changing the true essence, the essential character of, I would really have a problem with it going to a residential area where we have to rezone. Now that's really changing that character. As I look at the zoning map and this is R2 and R3, I think, wow, I'm going to struggle with that on that aspect. So as I look at the B5 and this area, I don't see that it is changing the essential character of the surrounding areas.
But haven't we already approved site planning to the south anyways that essentially changes the character of that area? Isn't there an approved site plan on file for that area to the south? That's not.
Yeah.
That was the original.
That was the original, yes.
Yeah.
But that, wasn't that there was a
elderly facility.
Yeah. There was something else that was going to be
residential.
I just wanted to jump in. I think I haven't gathered a consensus that there's a consensus that they don't want to take a look at the rezoning. We're not reviewing this. I'm going to give you a
just
peek.
to see it in context.
This is the existing planned approved self-storage. You can see the ends of the approved office building further to the east. Just so you know, this is east, this is west. Remus Road is here, south, north. These are the existing parcels. So you have 1, 2, 3, skip over this one, and then here would be 4.
And how deep are those currently? Do we know? I know we're talking about reserving 200 feet off the road. So the units that are proposed would be.
They're not real deep because I went out there today.
It's on sheet 2, Peter.
Okay.
Okay, yep. Zoom up in there and you'll be able to tell. You got 182 plus 132. So 310. 314 feet.
So if we go back to page 4 to just give you an idea of the layout. See on the back parcel where you'd have the self-storage units. So they'd be directly behind the existing plan.
And Peter, the master plan, where it's designated as commercial, industrial mix, light industrial, I'm assuming by looking at the depth of that, that probably goes back probably close to the end of that.
So here's the future
Plan,
land
right?
use map. This is parcel 1, 2, 3. Skip this one, and then draw a line parcel 4. So this is the portion that is zoned. The not zoned, excuse me. It is the future land use map has it as commercial light industrial. The green is rural buffer. And so the one parcel that would be proposed falls under rural buffer. The remaining 1, 2, 3 parcels grouped here are the commercial light industrial. The rezoning that we will be potentially getting to later would be rural buffer.
So that speaks to what Denise was talking about.
But either way, we're changing rural buffer. We're impacting rural buffer whether we go west or south. And the fact of the matter is that the only reason that, on the rezone, the only reason that that's still in residential is because it was allowable as a special use for the assisted living, was a special use under that residential zoning, right?
As far as the assisted living, there was a proposed preliminary plan. There was never any final approval. The project never moved forward, but
We did approve it. I thought.
We did.
We did approve it.
We approved a special use at least.
Maybe that's what it was. Preliminary plan.
a preliminary plan. But since then, there hasn't been any, nothing has moved forward with the project. That was proposed to be, that had been proposed in this area. There wasn't anything proposed over here to the west.
I guess the way I see it is, to me, it's difficult to say that we're not changing character regardless of whether doing it to the north or the south. I mean, we have a desire for one type of business on the north, and the south is, sure, it's currently zoned residential, but nobody's going to build a house just south of the storage units. That's never going to be residential now. So, I guess if we'd like to keep going through the items, we can.
I have to say too that I don't accept the idea that because you've allowed the storage units that automatically means that having more is consistent with the character, because if you double the size of something, I mean, it seems like you've made a significant change to the overall area compared to having a fixed amount. And I have to say too that I've been trying to think back. I don't remember when this, and I was one of the people that voted for this. And one of the reasons was because it was farther back from the road and it looked like it was going to be relatively well screened. But also, I just don't remember any discussion that this was just the first step, that they were going to come back and essentially want to double it.
Yeah,
I just don't remember that.
I think from what I remember from the discussions is the tree buffers. There's a lot of trees there.
Yeah.
That was going to hide this largely from the highway.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think if you looked at the original plan, there was a screening set to be, except where all the natural tree line was already.
Yeah. It's still not, I mean, I don't particularly see it when I drive in on 20. So I think it is. And
that was my fear when I went out and looked. I thought if we move it that far north, you can't not see it. It's not that far.
Yeah.
Granted, additional buildings in front would help protect that.
Yeah. If you get the additional buildings.
Right.
Well, and I just want to reiterate, it does not change the character. We have storage units on that. That is undeniable. It doesn't, by adding more, doesn't change the character necessarily.
Yeah,
Where they're located, we could say Gives it a different look than what but it doesn't change the character of it. That's what we're talking about. So we can debate this all night, but at the end of the day, it does not change the character by adding more. We're not, it's not mixed use. It's obviously, we know what the zoning is. We're not asking for a variation of the zoning because it's already zoned. So from my lens, it doesn't change the character. Just because we had more and where it's located. That's just my opinion, and I just want it stated because it was just refuted, like it was dismissed. And I'm not gonna allow that to happen because we all have our independent voices here. So I disagree with that.
That's why there's seven.
Respectfully,
And I would-
Mr. Chair.
I would-
Well,
Respect-
I wasn't intending to speak for anyone else on the planning commission. I was
Right.
speaking for myself.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, and the only other thing, and we can move on, and I appreciate your point, so I'm not trying to shoot down your point in any way, but if we do step back to number one, when we talk about harmonious, I think that is why we have, you know, a character criteria and a harmonious criteria. I think that maybe I can even concede that it's not necessarily out of character. When we talk about harmonious, when we talk about harmonious with the zoning that it currently is, and it's not just the adjacent property, it's the surrounding area as well. And when we expand mini storage, or when we expand any type of use, we're expanding the purview of that surrounding area as well. We do have wooded and then residential on the other side, so and acknowledging obviously that the B5 zoning along the frontage means that there's going to be built out there someday in some fashion or another.
Actually, your ordinance says with adjacent property, not the surrounding area.
Number one says, in a manner harmonious with the character of adjacent property and surrounding area.
However, I will have to say that even though I understand that residential is across the street, and I understand that, but the frontage of that particular area is a B5. That is
Correct.
B5, so then therefore, that in the future, there could be some buildings placed in that frontage, just like there was, just to the east of, I believe, the Oaks. There was a proposed strip mall for a long, long time, and that just didn't happen. But though that is B5 there too, on that side
Correct.
of the road.
Right.
So therefore, again, as we get into the surrounding areas, that whole area
But that's why
is meant for that.
That's why we go through a special use process,
That's
is
for
because
B5.
we're acknowledging
Yes, and
that
this is
Special use of B5. This is
yeah, but it's
industrial
still-
by use.
this, correct.
And that's where I have the issue.
This is
that
industrial by
This
use.
is not what, when we talk about our master plan, is that commercial corridor, right?
I just wanted to bring up the zoning map, just so everybody, instead of trying to visualize it maybe in their head. This is where the existing self-storage has already been approved. It's in development. This would be parcel 1, 2, 3, zone B5. Skip this parcel, and then imagine a line going down. This portion of that parcel would be R1, rural residential. This portion would be B5. What has been talked about across the street, this is the Oaks subdivision, zoned R2A. There is, in the frontage of that development, B5 property. The parcel that's already been developed in its entirety is B5. Parcel to the south, R3A.
And the R3A to the north is Green Acres, correct?
Yes. Green Acres retirement, yep.
Maybe we can get through the rest of our criteria, we can have an additional conversation.
Okay. So, we'll see how we do. The special use shall not interfere with the general enjoyment of adjacent property.
I don't think it will interfere with the general enjoyment of the adjacent property.
It's consistent with the adjacent properties on that side of the street.
I don't necessarily disagree. At least based on what's there. I suppose it depends on how you define enjoyment, but that's always true. Other comments? The special use shall not be hazardous to adjacent property or involve uses, activities, materials, or equipment that will be detrimental to the health, safety, welfare, safety or welfare of persons or property through the excessive production of traffic noise, smoke, odor, fumes, or glare.
I don't see it, especially as it's notice in regards to the as if our lighting ordinance says it's down shielded and with the appropriate screening, I don't see the glare.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't allow for the fumes.
If they follow the use
Yeah,
laws.
that's right.
Yeah. I mean, here's where I agree. If what's already there is gonna pass muster on this, then more of the same thing you couldn't really argue that it doesn't.
As part of the public comment, we did have some concerns expressed about fumes and glare. I think the glare, especially with the sign, has been addressed. I think the number that was given was 8%, is that correct? Yeah, so that's a far cry from what it was previously, which was greater than 50, as I recall. But when we talk about, and I believe it was the Arboretum that mentioned in public comments, the impact potentially of fumes and odors from vehicles. Well, the only vehicle that I was thinking that would impact that would be a large vehicle, a semi, or could be a moving truck for that matter. It was mentioned in public comment about moving household furnishings in transition. So that's the only thing that I really see that could be an impact with that. Other than that, I see it as light vehicles moving stuff, like people do in most storage units. Unless I know these are.
I feel that M20 probably produces much more.
Probably.
Uncontrollably.
Probably. I agree with that. Yeah.
Okay. Special use shall be adequately served by essential public facilities and services, or it shall be demonstrated that the person responsible for the proposed special use shall be able to continually provide adequate services and facilities deemed essential to the special use under consideration. The said facilities or services shall be approved by the Central Michigan Health Department. Well, not really health facilities on the premises, but any thoughts with that? Okay. Number 6, when deemed necessary by the Township Board or Planning Commission, the use shall be adequately screened by distance and landscaping to protect the rights of all adjoining property. We've had some discussion about screening. I think we're all agreed that whatever gets built, if anything gets built, is going to be well screened as best as can be managed with that.
Let me ask a question. I know, and I think I already know the answer to this. There was concern about where the to the north, where the new units would be built, and then the commercial frontage right there potentially. All of that land is owned by the same landowner, correct? Am I right?
Three out of the 4 parcels.
I'm sorry. To everything to the right. That's not.
Not the west parcel.
I'm talking about the existing to the right here where the.
You might have to get up.
I'm talking about on this side right here.
I think you
It's
said
all,
that
it's all owned by the same person.
Okay, that's what I thought. So
2
then
parcels.
So whatever decisions are made impacts the primary owner, not others. And that it's, you're not crossing one property to get to the other or anything like that. It's all one parcel, correct? With the exception of what we're looking at to the west. Okay. That's what I thought.
Okay. All right. The Township Board or Planning Commission, in connection with approval of any application, may require reasonable undertaking by the applicant to guarantee and assure by agreement, including a performance bond, to be posted by the applicant or by some other reasonable surety arrangement at appropriate stages of the plan development, that the development will be executed in accordance with the approved plan. Applicant has stated that they plan to build the rest of the project. So,
In accordance with the approved plan.
yes.
Yes.
Other thoughts on that? Next, that such use will be an asset to the township.
Agreed.
Go with public comment. I don't use the tool, but it sounds like there's a lot of people that understand that we need this development.
I don't think we've been provided with evidence in support or really in contrary to it. I don't really have much of an opinion on it, but I mean, I would expect a business owner to say that it's needed, but I haven't seen data to support it. Then again, I haven't seen the data that doesn't support it, so I can't really speak to that issue anyways.
Neutral.
I'm neutral.
So the existing project, if it's built out, what's already been approved by my calculation is 384 units. So that's a pretty large set of storage units as it is. I don't have data. I don't know what the market for this actually is. But the way I look at it is the north part there, who knows what could go there? We've heard for years, maybe a supermarket, maybe other big boxes, maybe this, maybe that. If you put the storage units on that northern tier, you're drastically limiting what can ultimately go along the road. And I personally I don't think I'm prepared to do that. I know it's been, the west side has been the slow, the lagging part of this whole area in terms of development and so on, but I don't know. I just feel like when we laid out the future land use map, this is not what I was thinking of. So I have real problems. I would have no problem with, going further west. But obviously that's not an option apparently, but I guess I'll conclude by saying this. It may be an asset to the township. I'm not convinced that making it that big is necessarily an asset to the township, but I'm also not convinced that it would be as much of an asset to the township as potentially other things that might go along 20.
And I guess that's what I was trying to get at when I said it changed the essential character, by essential character of what the township's desire for that frontage is, and putting this in there really limits that. So I agree with how you looked at that, Chair.
I would just caution you, I know that this isn't my place, but before you deny it for a reason like that, you really should get legal counsel. Because one of the reasons you cannot deny something is to say, I'd rather see something else built there. It's, you either meet the criteria or you don't meet the criteria.
To me, it changes the essential character.
Yeah, I think we're providing support right here. I think we are still in deliberation amongst ourselves.
Correct.
But yeah, I think it's certainly within our discretion to define whether something is harmonious or meets the character of the surrounding area.
It's a special use.
That's why it's a special use.
I would just remind the board if there is any kind of need for any kind of clarification or additional documentation or anything else you need. The ordinance does state that you're not under any requirement to make a recommendation tonight. The ordinance states that within a reasonable time following the public hearing, the Planning Commission shall review the application for a special use permit, testimony received at the public hearing, and other materials submitted in relation to the request, and make a recommendation to the Township Board. Although we typically are able to make a recommendation the same night of the public hearing, I just want to let the Planning Commission know that you are not required to have to make the recommendation at tonight if you need further documentation, support, evidence, legal advice, or whatever.
Thank you. Other comments on number 8? Number 9, requirements and conditions of each individual special use permitted shall be complied with unless otherwise mentioned within the section. That's procedural. And 10, any special use permit shall be revoked by the Union Township Board upon recommendation of the Union Township Planning Commission whenever the operation fails to comply with any of the required conditions or may be subject to the penalties of this ordinance. And then the final two items there are the reminder that the permit transfers with the property, and that if the project has not commenced within 1 year of the date of issuance of the permit, it can be voided. And then, as was pointed out earlier, we have the separate section for requirements or criteria for self-storage buildings in a B5 district. Ready to go through those? Subject to the following: allowed as a special use provided they are located in a B4 or B5 district. This is in a B5 district. Provided they shall be architecturally designed so as not to have a flat roof, and instead shall have that style of roof, and you have pictures to show that that is the design. Provided they meet all required conditions of the B4 or B5 zone. All entrances and exits shall be designed in accordance with the Isabella County Road Commission requirements. It's further required that all sites shall provide points of ingress and egress that are located upon a public road. For this project, it's what already exists, as I understand it.
That's not a public road, is it? So did you say it had to be a public road?
It is further required that all sites shall provide points of ingress and egress that are located upon a public road. I mean, this ultimately empties out onto Lincoln Road, correct?
Totally agree.
Lincoln and Fine.
But this is separate property, right?
It is up until it's joint.
But do we, just getting clarification, thanks. But we're talking about the special use permit. So is it at the boundary of the special use permit that has to do the egress out of public road, or is it? I mean, I totally understand what you're doing here, but I just want to make sure that.
I think it's moot once it becomes joined, and it's going to become joined if it's
What's
purchased with the other property.
But are we talking about the boundary of the special use permit in this question?
This is an amended special use permit, so the entire project area will be part of the special use permit.
So the additional storage would have access to the existing ingress and
Right.
egress from the already approved special use.
Yeah, I don't see that as an issue.
I'm going to say for myself that I think that that's a code enforcement issue, and if it meets
code, it's
opinion of the township is that it satisfies that requirement.
I guess where I was going was, are they gonna be required to have the future development entrances off 20?
That would be decided as noted that this is just for a future development conceptual area. If this were to actually go into development, it would require its own site plan where that would be reviewed by either the Isabella County Road Commission or defaulted to MDOT because it's on Remus Road.
Okay, I agree with that point. I'm going back to Phil's bullet. So this, what we're saying for this new special use permit, just because it abuts the old one, that doesn't dump out on a public road.
Once again, this is not a new special use permit. This is an amendment of the existing special use permit. If approved, this would be all one special use permit. It's not two.
Thank you, but wait to be recognized, please.
Trying to, well, I want to get you a full picture. I can have one. So if, I think the only way, if you imagine so you can see this was approved by MDOT and Isabella County Road Commission. Access off of Lincoln Road, access off of Remus Road. The office building located around here. The existing already approved self-storage here. The additional self-storage, remember this is parcel 1, 2, 3, 4. If this is developed, it has access to these private drives that end out ingress and egress off of Remus and to Lincoln Road. And so they have access to get off onto the main road of Remus and Lincoln Road.
Yeah, I'm not arguing that. My point is to the documentation. This special use permit, we're saying needs to go to a public road. This is going to a parking lot. So, that has access to a public road. Maybe it's not a problem, I'm just bringing up the point, and even if it is amended special use permit, that means, obviously, we're talking about the whole area again. You follow me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get you.
And so I'm just bringing the point up, and maybe it's not a concern, it's clarification for me.
I'm going to guess, because I see what you're bringing up, I get your point. So the original SUP includes the existing storage units that are there, plus the planned ones that were approved. But I'm assuming that the Isabella County Road Commission requirements were met by the ingress and egress that Peter pointed out, that met those conditions for the existing SUP. Okay. That's what I...
Yes,
So
the
why do we address it?
Because it's in our list.
It's on the list.
I know, I know,
I just read them.
I know.
So, yeah, I would argue that must have been met with the ICRC requirements.
Mhm.
Therefore, extending this, I wouldn't think would violate that.
Because we don't
Am
have
I
a list
missing
of-
something?
Nope.
Okay.
I think we'll just make a note of that, because I don't think we need to address it, but.
Ready to move on?
All set.
All right. Greenbelt planting and screening will be required so as to obscure view from any adjacent residential district. Screening will also be required where property is within 250 feet of any residentially zoned property. Screening shall consist of non-deciduous trees not less than 3 feet in height, planted and maintained in live condition, not less than 15 feet on centers.
I believe that they have shown that they are going to do the appropriate planning as we get to the, if this passes in regards to the site plan, is to recommend the planting to the north, since that is not a developed area at this point, but we would have to would meet that at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, that would have to be specified because it's not residential. This is specifically talking about bordering residentially zoned
But
property.
250 feet.
There's residential across
It
the
is,
street.
it is, so then therefore.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, I guess it would, well, is it within 250 feet?
Yeah, the Green Acres.
Oh, okay, all right, yeah.
And likely the Oaks, I didn't measure it.
Partly the Oaks,
Right.
yep. But would address that.
Yeah,
at
so
the time.
if there's a motion to approve this at some point, we want to make sure in the SUP that we put any special screening requirements that we want that are not part of a typical B5, if we desire it.
Mhm. Other comments on screening? All right. Maximum length of any self-storage building shall be 250 feet. That seems to have been addressed in the plan. Actually, the newer buildings, most of the newer buildings are shorter than that. No storage of combustible or flammable liquids, combustible fibers, or explosive materials as defined in the Fire Prevention Code, or toxic materials shall be permitted within the self-storage buildings or upon the premises. I think I've asked this before. I don't know if I've asked it. I think I have asked it of these applicants and other applicants, but how does one enforce that?
It's in the lease documents.
The lease. No storage outside of the self-storage building shall be permitted. Use of the premises shall be limited to storage only and shall not be used for operating any other business, for maintaining or repairing of any vehicles, recreational equipment, or other items, for any recreational activity, hobby, or purpose other than the storage of personal items and business items as herein before set forth. And there's one more. Actually, I think that should be number 9, I guess, because there's no number 9.
Sure.
Our consultant will fix that.
Can I jump back to the storage outside the units? And I just need some clarification. So in this proposal, is it considered storage for where the landscape material is in the stables?
Those stables, you have to remember that the special use is over top of a larger parcel. So the special use is not the entire parcel. The use which is on the B5 in the commercial, you are allowed screen storage in the rear yard, which is where that was placed. It is not when they talk about no outside storage, it would be outside storage of the rental persons.
I just want to make sure we're
No, it's
not
addressed,
confusing.
addressed on another, under another section.
I just wanted to point out, because it shows it on here, this is the rezoning, so, disregard that, but is what you're talking about, Mike, the
Yes.
store, so, yeah. Although this is located in proximity to the self-storage, which is a special use, these storage bins have nothing to do with this operation as it does to the principal, permitted use, with the office building, the, McGurk Sand and Gravel
So
business.
are those storage bins part of the special use boundary currently?
They were located within the, like I said, the proximity, but they were
They're
not
not-
applied as part of the special use.
So the special use abuts basically to the beginning of the bins and,
But this outdoor storage is related to the McGurk Sand and Gravel business, and
Right.
not the McGurk mini storage.
well, so it is or is not part of the zone that's currently special use?
Is not. It's part of the B5.
Thank you. And I asked that only because piggybacking, I guess, on what you said, no other operating, you may not operate any other business within that special use, and that would be operating another business. As long as it's outside the zone,
As long as that's agreed upon and documented and just clarification. And not that we're considering C, but that would be right in the middle of it, and just for clarification, that's part of the McGurk Sand and Gravel business, not to be used by or leased out for storage.
Yes, no.
Okay.
Other comments on that? Okay, and then the last item is all entries, drives, and parking areas shall be hard surfaced and shall provide drainage and grading to move stormwater away from the storage units. And the site plan appears to have a
Yeah, I think to the
drainage
south there's a
plan to the south.
stormwater. And when I looked at the site today, it looked like there was a hole in the wall for water to move through.
Okay, so there you have it. Further discussion? Once again, a reminder, this is a recommendation to the Township Board. So we can have a motion if anyone is ready. We can have further discussion. Any questions if people have further questions?
So I'm still struggling with option B. Because if it was me just talking about harmonious, bullet one, I would rather see less frontage visible possibly to the road of storage. Because I like where their storage is now. I don't have a problem with the visibility of it. I think it was a good location. But in my mind, option B, which we're not talking about, seems to tuck it even further away from the general public. It takes the headlights, it takes the possible door shutting even further away from existing residential, whatever. I'm not saying that they can hear it, but point of our process here is we're addressing special use permit and we're not even considering maybe what we think is a better option that would take care of our public, still gives our taxpayer and developer the ability to build their development, but we're not even talking about it. So I'm not sure, maybe I need some coaching on process. Are we forced to talk special use permit and we continue to go down this path and maybe not take what we as the representatives of the township think might be a better solution presented by the developer? I'm just thinking out loud.
I think it's perfectly reasonable to consider the fact that the applicant has offered an alternate solution if this one is not acceptable to us. Right?
But
It's on
by
the agenda.
process, will we ever get there?
Well, if there's a recommendation to deny this special use, we absolutely will get there tonight.
Per the gentleman who represents the developer, we gotta follow process and provide valid reasons why the first agenda item would not meet our guidelines.
I spoke on the harmonious use when it came around the first time. I'll reiterate that. When we're talking about something that is that close to the roadway, I disagree with the notion that it is a harmonious use. Due to its proximity to in particular the surrounding area. We have people from the Oaks that have come. We have the property association that's come and said that they're in opposition to it. Fully understanding, it's B5 frontage along both sides of the road. But this is why we have special use hearings, is because we need to consider what our master plan is. We need to consider what we have included, or what's included as a future land use for that. And we had lengthy discussions about this, saying that our goal was to bring in what would be considered transition types of businesses that would be less impactful to the surrounding residential. So I will continue to disagree, and I know that we talk about the special use changing the essential character. I think there's some I have concerns about issue number 1 and issue number 2, and I have provided rationale for that for both of them. I will also say, whether it's out of turn or not, I will also say that if I was looking at a special use request right now for a parcel to the south, I would in all likelihood be supportive of that special use. And if we do deliberate tonight on a rezoning, I will in all likelihood be supportive of a rezoning of that parcel.
My comment is that as I look at, in regards to special use and so forth in this district, that all the requirements, conditions, and procedures, they have complied to each one of those. In my opinion, in regards to as we go through the 10 criteria, and that this meets all that, and it's in line with the zoning, and I disagree. I believe it is part of the future land use, and for us to say that the appropriate business would not be able to fit within the area that is allowed in that area as they conceptually showed us. I can't sit here and say that a particular business can or cannot be there. They have the room, they showed us. So from the site plan, from everything that we have in front of us, I believe this applicant has showed us that they do meet the requirements of the special use permit.
Other comments?
I guess I'll jump in here. I tend to agree with Commissioner Buckley. 1 and 2 is where I stick. I think they satisfy other items, requirements. Where I have the issue is an industrial type use. That's why mini storage is identified as a valid use for industrial, but special use for business. We have latitude in special use to have special requirements. I certainly would support this moving to the west. If it was just to the west, I wouldn't be concerned about it. Where I have the concern is it's encroaching on the major corridor. We have residential right across the street with the Green Acres. It doesn't fit. I understand why you say the master plan fits, but I disagree and think that the master plan says it doesn't fit there. So I can't support that, but I would be very open to other options. Plan B, is that what we're calling it?
I like it. Can't talk about it, but.
Yeah. And like I said, to the west doesn't bother me. It's the north encroachment that I have issue with.
So does that fall under harmonious?
Yeah, I think it does, because for me, mini storage is an industrial use that is permitted by special use only in B5. And there's a reason for that. That it's not something you typically want to just see in every B5 zone, right? There are places it fits harmoniously and there are places it doesn't fit harmoniously. And that's why we go through this process and we bring our opinions to this as to how it fits.
And so, yes, thank you, but so it goes back to what our township sees from the road as far as harmonious with the surrounding area, right? Because that's where they're allowed to go, out on the road. And so it's to your point of going further north. I agree. Because we got a sneak peek of option B, because we got a sneak peek, there's a lot less to hide from the general public on the road. And I think just because we've already seen the existing development, which is at the furthermost north point of the existing, it's lack of better terms, it's not an eyesore. So it's acceptable, I think. So if we were to consider a different option that tucked it even further away from the general public's eye, instead of spreading it out along the corridor, even though I think the proposal is to do some great screening it's still, until we get the development of the front load, I think you're still gonna see it. I don't think we can keep people from seeing it. It's gonna be very difficult. But I think if you're thrown out as option A and option B, and you could tuck it to the south, I think it would be very difficult for the general public, even from the east, which would be through the apartments, and from Lincoln Road, it would be more difficult to see it, even though they're gonna still have to screen it. Still be more difficult to see from there, in my opinion. And that's all to the harmonious point.
Well, I'm going to agree with Commissioner Webster. I think that all of the criteria is met. The proper setbacks are there. Eventually, in whatever phase you want to call it, that those new storage units will be fronted by commercial businesses that would screen them away. If we were taking these units right up to the, I think it was 250, I can't remember, 250 feet I think is what the setback was, then I wouldn't support this, because it would be right on Remus Road. This is, I see these almost in 3 different phases, if you will, with the first phase being a commercial front, the second phase being this proposed plan, and the third phase being what's currently been approved. So I guess as I just go through the criteria, I think they meet all of the criteria.
And I'm sorry, but I draw a line with the commercial front, because that's not part of this decision. It leaves room. It may never happen. We hope it happens.
Right.
I like that people are thinking that way, but there's no guarantee that that's gonna happen.
That's true, but we can ask for the screening, and they are going to screen.
I agree.
So then therefore,
Yep, I agree.
whether it's the building or the appropriate screening that we would have the ability to do, it's gonna be screened.
And my response to the commercial was that it appeared like there was a perspective that it would be unsightly from Remus Road. That was my response to that, because the criteria is the criteria that, you know, and I think they meet that. So the proper screening, as was mentioned, would be there. There was some discussion earlier about the size of the parcel related to that. We don't have a crystal ball as to what, if that's going to be a major grocery store, if that's going to be a doctor's office. We have no idea. So when we start talking about the use of that land, it could be one building. It doesn't have, right now it's showing 2. It doesn't necessarily have to be that, with the exception of, I think I heard Tim say that there potentially had to be a road that went back there. I remember that.
I think the fire department required
Fire
it.
department,
Have a
yep.
cabinet.
Yep.
I've generally said my piece, but I would point out, just clarification on the harmonious issue, is that I think that we can all drive around and look at what we see in terms of harmonious with another B5 or B4 districts, and when we see mini storage that's placed directly adjacent to other businesses, and I think that there is a clear chilling effect that can exist for businesses that might be located. Number one, they're boxed into a certain size, which may not, certainly wouldn't be conducive to a grocery store, but may not be conducive to others. But I think that we have to be cognizant of the fact that when we're talking about harmonious, we're talking about what chilling effect that might exist when there's when you're immediately abutting a self-storage. And the reality is that some businesses just simply do not want to be located right next to a self-storage. That's why we generally see them out in the country. We generally see them away from other developed areas.
So I guess I bring the point of the self-storage that's just to the east. On M20. That's right behind the laundromat. It's in the city. But
It's in the township.
is that still township?
Yeah.
Thank you. Work in Midland, sorry. So I look at that as very similar to what the intent of this is. Not that the office is gonna be in the laundromat at the front of this road, but it's gonna be some sort of business. And you hardly see, unless you go down Bradley, you hardly see that storage unit behind that store. So, again, I'm trying to, because we were talked about two options, it's, can we take what our preference is, or do we take it in order? Because it sounds to me like we have to vote.
Yeah, oh yeah, we'll have to vote to either pass or
Right.
recommend approval or denial, and then we'll address what comes next.
With reason.
Chair, can I be recognized just 1 second? Another option would be to table it, wait to hear, what's up with the rezone. As Peter said, you don't have to make a decision tonight. You could table it, hear the rezoning request, and then you have probably a better body of information to evaluate the two proposals in juxtaposition of each other.
I was just gonna, before the applicant wanted to be recognized, it's about 9:30. We've been here a while. I don't know how much longer the planning commission wants to be here. So if there's an interest in hearing the rezoning application and the applicant would be willing to allow that to move forward and not withdraw it, we don't have to make a decision tonight. You can, it states within a reasonable amount of time. We have at times not made a recommendation the same meeting. So there would be no different with this applicant than any other applicant. Instead of, I guess, just spending the next half hour trying to get a motion for this application.
Peter, one point of clarification, if we were to go that route, if there were a motion to table to allow us to listen to the rezoning request, and there was a desire to approve the rezoning request, can we make the rezoning request contingent on either, like, for instance, a denial of the SUP, or do we have to go back and address that separately? Because then, I guess what I'm asking is, do we put ourselves in a position of addressing the rezoning first, potentially approving that, and then addressing this separately and potentially approving in front and back? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So remember, you're not approving anything tonight. You guys don't approve anything. You make recommendations.
Right. Exactly.
And so the board, the commission right now could simply just say we're not ready to make a recommendation, and we move on. At that point, we can move on with the agenda. The applicant has the option to either move forward with these applications that they've provided or withdraw them. If we move forward, we will hear those applications. If the planning commission was able to make a recommendation on the rezoning, again, with rezoning, there's a slight difference. You're not required. It says the planning commission shall submit proposed amendment along with its recommendation to the township board for consideration within 60 days from the conclusion of the public hearing. So with a rezoning, you have within 60 days from today. But if you were able, let's say, we move to the rezoning, or get a recommendation for or against, eventually at some point, if the applicant does not withdraw the special use permit application, we would at some point within a reasonable amount of time have to make a recommendation. So by moving on to the rezoning, if we are able to get a recommendation from that application tonight, if I'm answering the question, eventually we would have to revisit the special use if it is not the application not withdrawn.
If I can be briefly recognized again to maybe help.
Briefly.
You can table this application, and we could stipulate basically to keep this application tabled until action is taken, because we've got a lot of road to travel on rezone. Because you make a recommendation, it has to go to the county, then it comes back, it goes to the township board, they have to recognize it, and then we got to come back to you with a special use permit application with the new rezone in place and a site plan review. So that's a lengthy process. But we'd be willing to stipulate basically to hold that in abeyance, because in the law of unintended consequences, here's what happens. If you deny it, and we move on to the rezone, I don't have any choice but to wait till the township board makes its decision. And if it places its imprimatur on your denial, then I've only got 21 days. I got to do something, and I got to do that in court. And I don't want to have to do that. I'd rather have everybody have the full opportunity to review the merits of the rezone, run that through its course, and only if that's unsuccessful do we then have to come back to the special use permit application with respect to the matter before you now. So I would submit that that might be, an appropriate procedural mechanism to deal with this issue.
Chair?
Right.
It seems to me, if we were to move on, if we were to postpone or table item A and ultimately get to the rezone, we have to have the public hearing tonight because it was published, but we wouldn't have to take action on that tonight either, and we could come back and provide feedback and help the applicant decide which direction is best to pursue with us. Because we may see item C, the rezone, and go, you know what? Now that I've learned this, I feel differently about the SUP for some reason. I don't know what that would be that would change my thoughts on that, but I think I'd like to see the full picture. It would help me.
What is our, for item A, the special use, what is our, if we can vote to postpone or table. Table has to take it back up in a month. Postpone is
We
until
bring it back.
we bring it whenever it comes back.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I think I'm ready to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion to postpone special use 2019-01 at this point in time.
Support.
Motion was by Buckley to postpone consideration of the special use permit 2019-01. Second was by Milky. Further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Motion carried. I heard basically 5-1. So then, if the special use is not being considered, then the site plan is not really ripe for consideration either. So we would move directly to item C, is that correct?
Because we haven't approved the agenda, we would have to address the site plan as a postpone or a table. We can't dismiss it. So it has to be, there has to be an actionable, it's an actionable item, so something.
So a
has
motion to
happen.
postpone B as well?
Yep, so I'll move that we postpone. And is
So-
that still preliminary, or is that just the site plan based on?
That's their site
It is
plan.
the
Final.
site plan, it's no longer, so, just for the record, to postpone B, the site plan.
I think you got a second on it, Brian.
So the motion was by Shingles to postpone item B, site plan. It didn't get a number, did it?
That's what I was just gonna say, we need a number for it.
Is it also 2019-01, first site plan of the year?
It's our
You'd
No,
have to-
because Graphic Central got 01. Anyway, it doesn't have a number, so we'll refer to it as the site plan for the self-storage building expansion at various addresses East Remus Road. Was there a second?
I will second it.
A second by Darren. Further discussion on the motion to postpone the review of the site plan? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. So, item C, rezone request 2019-01. This is a public hearing. Peter will
No.
introduce the topic.
Sure. This is a rezoning application for property south of Remus Road and to the west of Lincoln Road. It is currently zoned R3A. The property is proposed, a portion of the property is proposed to be rezoned from R3A to B5. The intent is for the expansion of an existing self-storage operation. Notice was sent in the paper and to those within 300 feet of the rezoning. I think we've heard other comments. I believe everyone in the room and the board is familiar. I did show the proposed on the overhead or on the projector. So we can go into more detail, but I believe everyone on the board and in the room is familiar with the introduction of this rezoning application.
Okay. Do you have that?
Yes.
That visual? So we'll move to the public hearing once again, similar to the first one in the sense that the applicants will have ample opportunity to speak to their proposal. So the point of this is to solicit input from the public. We want to give everyone who wants to speak an opportunity to speak. So we'll ask you to come forward, give us your name and address for the minutes, address your comments to the commission, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. And then once everyone who wants to speak has spoken, we'll entertain the possibility of recognizing people for a second time. So the public hearing on rezone request 2019-01 is open at 9:31. Is there anyone who would like to address the Planning Commission on this?
I'm Scott Daigle. I spoke earlier. I think what I said before still stands. Oaks neighborhood would like to oppose, we're like the board to oppose this recommendation on the same grounds as before, that we don't want to live in an industrial park or near an industrial park. We feel like this is one of many potential future incremental steps. I think everything that has been described to us today actually describes and reinforces the idea that there are any number of incremental steps the Berks are trying to make on these and the surrounding properties. I haven't heard anything that says it's anything other than a series of incremental steps. And I also would like to point out that although they may have complied with the rules and requirements of the board, they only did so because the board required them. For example, the light, they did turn it down only because we asked them to turn it down instead of taking the action of being polite to the community around them. I think that represents that they're in the business of business and not in the business of representing the community around them. Thanks.
Thank you.
So as I said before, I'm Terry Somerville representing Arboretum Apartments. And we are against this rezoning from an R3A to a B5 for the same reasons that I said before, that I think adding, I don't think this area was meant to be zoned B5. And changing it to a B5 would create more storage units and making it look more industrial and hurting the local property values. I think this would be very unsightly and detrimental to the neighborhood. And I just think it would change it in the neighborhood in a negative way. And I don't think the residents of Arboretum or in that area would like to live next to an industrial area. So we are against the rezoning of this property.
Thank you.
Jeremy Sheets, I live at 1740 Leroy Lane. Our subdivision is directly bordering this development, and based on the quality of the development so far, I'm for this rezoning. The building has been very attractive. We've not experienced any problems with additional noise or fumes or traffic, and I think this would be a good rezoning request to approve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, board. I'm Cheryl Hunter. I'm at 500 East Meadowbrook. I also have a business in this community. I think that Union Township should be a little bit pro-business because that brings on jobs. It brings on tax dollars. If we have more tax dollars in Union Township, we can have better sidewalks, we can have lighting. I have a business on the corner of Isabella and Bluegrass. And to this day, there's no lighting over there. It's dark. Union Township tells me that they don't have the money to be able to do that. So if we bring on a development in Union Township, we're gonna have some money to be able to give lights to all the people that live in the corner of Bluegrass in Isabella. There's low-income housing, there's 55 and older, there is student housing, there is a lot of business in that area. So it upsets me when I hear that we have, I think, a great project. And I think it's something that is going to be attractive. It already looks attractive over there. I think what they've done with their beautiful sign that says Westwood, is that what it says? Westwood, all the trees that they've put in, the way the business looks, I think that they bring a lot to Union Township. And I want you as a board to really look at that and to appreciate what they're trying to do. I know that they come in and they have, a large business that they're putting in, so it's a lot to take on. But I think having them in our township is very important. And I have a sidewalk. What I'm gonna say, I've got a little bit of a cold, so, sorry. I have a sidewalk in the front of my business, Hunter's Ale House, that started to be built, I think 3 or 4 years ago. Union Township, when Russ Allwood was the manager, he asked me if I'd go try to help get sidewalks built on Bluegrass. So I did. I took the project on. I tried to get some people to be involved in the sidewalk. I have a sidewalk. The next business or land or lot next to me does not have a sidewalk. I have a partial sidewalk in the front of my business that I'm paying tax dollars on that isn't completed because they've said there's not enough money. So I'm here in support of this great project in order to help my business so that I can survive on the corner of Bluegrass and Isabella, just to have lighting and the proper things that that our customers and that our community needs on that side. So I'm in support. Thanks.
Thank you.
My name is Tom Keequam. I live at 1908 Oakwood in the Oak Meadows Condominium Association. Been there since 2001. I believe the back windows of my condo are right across the field from this development. And I take no exception to the application as proposed. I strongly encourage it. As a resident there, and also many know me as the chairman of the Union Township Economic Development Authority, in which the West Economic Downtown Development Authority district is within. And this is kind of what we work for, and we've been working for. And kind of speaking on what Cheryl Hunter and Jeremy Sheets, I get worried. We have put a lot of money into the West DDA over 20 years. We've gone out to huge bonds, put the infrastructure to do these things. I think this is an investment in the community. And then as far as mini storage, I don't think it's possible to get another commercial type development that is tamer and quieter than a well put together mini storage development. And thirdly, the profound notion notion of, you know, what do we want to see there? And I know we're not supposed to talk about that, you know. And I've worked with syndicates from overseas, and Royal Dutch Shell and Kroger and what they're trying to do, and had them on the west side of town, had them on the east side of town. This is probably the best thing we could do here, simply because you get a syndicate coming in with a $100 million development. This isn't a flea on an elephant's back. And for those that encourage that kind of development. But I think you guys do your due diligence is amazing. I didn't know the ordinance differentiated between a coniferous tree and a deciduous tree. I mean, that's you guys are doing fantastic. But I just want to say I take no exception to the application and strongly encourage the recommendation and approval of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Other public comments? Were there any written comments on this one? No written comments. Public comment going once, going twice. We thank the public for their comments. The public hearing on this application, we'll go ahead and close that at 9:41. Again, thank the public for their comments. Unless Peter has anything to add at this point, I will go ahead and open or invite the applicant to make their presentation.
Thank you. The Tim Beebe and Joe Quant show once again. First of all, to respond to the public comments, first of all, with respect to the light issue, first of all, we don't control the billboard, although when we heard the concerns of the community, we talked to the billboard operator to make sure that the luminescence of the billboard was turned way down, as far down as we could practically make it. I don't know if there's any further progress that can be made on that. And also to once again dispel something that, you know, well, you didn't do it till you were forced to do it. Well, that's absolutely wrong. You know, there's nothing in the ordinance that says how bright that sign can be. The applicant voluntarily undertook measures to address the community's concern, not because they were told to do so by the township. Second of all, with respect to the concerns articulated by the apartment property owner, the screening plan will completely alleviate and address any of those concerns. As you can tell from the site plan, the property will be completely concealed both through the use of the decorative wall and also the conifers that are planned to basically completely surround this property. So we think that with a combination of downshield night sky lighting as well as the conifer screening and the wall, we think that that will more than adequately address the concerns of the apartment property owner, which is still, you know, quite a distance away. It's over 600 feet away. You know, so we're doing everything we can to try to be accommodating to those adjoining land uses. There was also a comment made that this is an industrial use. Well, it's not an industrial use. Specifically, the ordinance speaks in the future land use map and master plan speaks to the planning of this property as commercial/light industrial. When you look at the definition of what is commercial and light industrial, it says the district is intended for a blend of medium intensity commercial and small scale light industrial uses. Light industrial uses include, but are not limited to, small scale manufacturing, laboratories, R&D, research and development firms, information technology firms, or other businesses that might be found in a technology park, period, end quote. I would submit to you that this is exactly the type of light industrial use that's contemplated. I know that there was some discussion with respect to the SUP amendment about the fact that, well, you know, light industrial really didn't mean this. If it didn't mean that, you wouldn't have light industrial that's permitted within the B5 district under the special use permit to begin with. And it also doesn't talk about just the uses that were identified, you know, during deliberation. It says including but not limited to, which expands the universe of what's allowed. It's important that you not let the exception swallow the rule. So I think that this is entirely something that is contemplated with respect to rezone. I think that you've all hit upon during your deliberations with respect to the special use permit amendment, the reasons why there's merit to this location. It is significantly isolated. It will be significantly screened to try to accommodate anyone who lives near it, to try to limit the potential impact that it may have. And it's set, you know, a long way off M20. You're never going to see it from the highway, regardless of what gets cleared or what gets built, you know, along the highway. And that's, you know, essentially that's why we did both of these at the same time. We wanted you essentially to have all the tools in your toolbox that are necessary. If we recognize the fundamental reality that there is a market for it, I've just been, you know, told by Chuck that he's basically 100% sold out of what he has. So there is a market for it, there is a demand for it. We wouldn't be asking to build it if there wasn't. I mean, these guys are not in business to make stupid decisions. So, you know, there's certainly a public demand for this type of use. Now the question is, where do we put it? There's certainly, you know, I get the fact that that it's a permitted use within the industrial zone, but there's a lot of industrial, most of the industrial zone property is not compatible with respect to this type of use that's out there. So your zoning allows for this type of use to be accommodated within the B5 district. That's why we're asking for the B5 zoning redesignation for this area. We think there's sufficient buffer. It's certainly compatible with the surrounding property to the north and to the east. And we're happy to answer it. And as you know, the section on rezoning is kind of a blank slate. You know, I don't have 10 criteria I can go through with you. Basically, it says we submit a site sketch and then talk about the merits of whether or not the appropriate land use mechanism would change. You know, and like I said, your master plan does look at this property as a commercial light industrial transition. That's all I have. Ken, did you?
Yep, I do have a few things. Peter, could you call out the
Master plan?
Out on the screen the area that the previously approved R3A development was on?
That would be this area.
Correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And there were public utilities which were extended to that, both water and sewer. Can you point out the parcel that we're talking about, the rezone?
It'd be this section of the parcel.
Okay, thank you. That area has public utilities extending to the border, both water and sewer. These are two parcels that I spoke to the planning commission on when we were discussing this matter. We also discussed the parcel, the land which is directly to the west of the B5. That is B5. And it goes all the way to the quarter line. And utilities have been extended out into that. That's what Mr. Kukwan was talking about in the West UVA. Part of your buffer definition talks about areas where utilities have not been extended. This was one of those items that I pointed out to the planning commission when they were looking at this map. That these areas should not be included in that buffer because it meets that. So this is an item that was discussed, and one of the things that you're going to have to do is look at your master plan and say, are we following your master plan? Are you following your master plan? The way you adopted it, unfortunately, you adopted something that doesn't hit the requirements that are in your master plan. So your map doesn't match the qualifications that are in it. And that was something that we discussed prior to you adopting. This will not be a spot zoning. It's adjacent to B5. The it's separated from an existing R3A by 600 feet of additional R3A, which is controlled by the same developer. Parcel to the west is a combination zone of B5 and what is that?
R1.
R1. And the developer, the owner developer, he is a developer also. Not the developer tonight, but he's not against the project that we're talking about for the reason. So I know that this map was going to come into play, the master plan map, but it is something that was specifically discussed. I wrote a several-page letter on multiple parcels across the township that should have been looked at and addressed that were very similar. So my concern is that your master plan map does not necessarily comply with the requirements for that buffer zone. I hope you take that into account.
Are there questions for the applicant?
May I?
Yeah, please.
You mentioned a wall. I can only partially see this.
Just on the wall that's already there.
In the where the retaining for the landscape is. Okay. Because what I see as far as screening is conifer or
We would be looking at
berming.
trees. In that area, I can get approximately 2.5 tall berm in that way.
I know where you can find some dirt for it.
Some really good screens.
Yeah.
To the commissioners, I do have what they have.
Oh, thank you.
There up front.
It's gonna be us. It's old.
Sorry, that is something that should be pointed out. This area actually will be approximately 4 feet lower on the north side of the existing storage units. Because everything is flowing to the south. So I'm stepping everything down. So when we start talking about if you can't see or trouble seeing the one that's there, this is even going to be lower. So I was pointing to that. Well,
It will be in there. It's gonna have its own buffer.
It looks like you have more or less the same detention arrangement as in the other plan because it's servicing the property that already exists to the north. What's servicing the new part?
we don't have to turn in a site plan yet,
Hmm.
just a site sketch.
Okay.
I'll be required to do full stormwater on this.
Yeah.
If it makes it.
Yeah.
But the way we have it set up, it's going to be going to chutes. If you've ever driven through Deerfield Village apartments, you know, very large detention basin, and much of that comes to chutes and move down into the detention basin will be some of the same.
Okay. I wanted to ask, so the property immediately to the east of this, that's that project that we looked at before, that's the,
Covenant?
yeah.
Yeah.
What's
Special use.
happening with that?
Covenant has kind of put a hold. Their last market study said that it was borderline.
Okay.
So is it completely dead? Well, from the township standpoint, it's completely dead because it's gone past a year and nothing's happened to it, so they would have to come back in. But is the overall project dead? No, Covenant's still out there looking, and do they wanna build something? Yeah, but it's a business. You gotta be
Okay.
able to make the numbers work.
Okay. That was a special use too, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
Assisted living in an R3A. Okay. All right.
I noticed in your prior SUP that you presented, and as I look at this site plan, you mentioned several times about a decorative wall. Not just, and you use the word and, not or, you use the word and. So will this project, do you see that this will be screened with a decorative wall and green space plantings?
As it is adjacent to the other one, it's got a common boundary with the wall that's already there.
Is that the
Backside-
wall that you're talking about with, because of the, okay, I didn't see a wall when I was out there. I saw the
bins.
bins, but I didn't see a decorative wall.
You have to go on the backside of it to see the brick patch.
Look at it from the south side.
It's brick in the cement, brick pattern.
Stamp.
So if that is the decorative wall, are you putting that around the entire perimeter?
Not what's proposed.
Okay, so this is very interesting.
What I
I see
heard
this
was-
multiple times.
What I heard from them in their presentation was a berm.
No, I heard that, but I'm
around
just reading what I've said,
and-
and I've this decorative wall, and I see this multiple times in the prior SUP. So if that's just that wall that one wall, then you're not talking about it the entire, okay, thank you, that's all I,
No, the entire area was fenced and it was black chain link.
yes, clarification of your decorative wall, okay.
Yeah, that was gonna be my question. So there's no intent to put that black chain link fencing?
No, there is.
Okay,
There is. It's in there, but it's in with the trees.
okay. Would it, so it would be inside of the trees presumably?
It's gonna be right along the edge of the asphalt. So,
Okay.
yes. But,
And,
yes,
and where's the berm relative to the trees? Outside of them?
the trees are on top of it,
Oh,
so that you get the added height.
oh yeah, okay. Do those work?
Very well. You see them everywhere.
But even when the trees are young, if you get a big rainstorm, does half of it wash away or?
Now, if they're planted correctly,
Okay.
planted correctly.
I think we did that on the north side of this doctor office area to protect that,
We
which
did it in-
neighborhood that is.
We did it in the Bamber Office Park.
Well, die-off of screening would need to be replaced anyways, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
I was just curious whether it would hold
Oh,
or
I see.
not, when in the early stages.
And then, regardless, if we were to rezone this, they would then have to apply for special use on this property because it's B5. If we so choose, because it's a SUP, we can require special screening. I mean, that's what's being proposed, and that might be fine for us, but just point of clarification, we have the right to, in an SUP, provide additional screening requirements if we feel necessary. But I would, re-second on the property, it definitely does drop. So from the north, I would think this would be much less visible, as was mentioned.
The highest point on that whole area is the northeast corner. You see that curve island that goes up into the black? It's on the northeast. A little further,
A
Peter.
little further, right there.
There to the south is the highest point on that entire piece of property. The natural.
right.
And about the only other place from the road that I can see the current construction, let's say the 3 buildings that are currently built, would be Lincoln, but they are a distance off. I mean, it's back there. And the only reason I can see it is because I can see the lights in, right? And then they are down shielded, they are, but you can see them. But it's a ways.
It's about 13 feet. Quarter mile.
This looks more harmonious than the other option.
Yeah, you had to, didn't you?
Trying to get my point in.
I guess it's getting late, but
Yeah.
my sense of irony is kicking up, and one of the reasons we're here and discussing this is because we declined to approve putting them off of Broomfield on a parcel that jutted in quite a far ways from the road and was surrounded by largely open land at that point. And I feel like this is sort of a similar deal in some respects. That's the only part of it that bothers me a little bit is that it's, when you go inland, you're cutting into what is technically, at least right now anyway, residential or potential residential property. Now he says that the owner of the R1 parcel is not, is not blown away by this, but you still wonder what's going to be the future of that R1 parcel if there is this, thing is in there.
The R1 being the one that
To
goes
the
all the way
west,
north to Remus, right?
Well, yeah,
West.
everything to the
Right,
west.
R1 being, to the west.
Yep.
At
I
west
mean-
and south, I guess.
Yes.
But the
Yeah.
current plot is already owned by the applicant. It's zoned what it is, but
Yeah.
it's,
Mhm.
it's not as though, it's gonna be, I'm guessing they're probably not gonna come in and try to build single-family dwellings behind the development they've already got.
Yeah.
I think and that's where I would see a difference between what was done on Broomfield, is because it was agricultural and R1, and it just kept going as agriculture and R1. But this is, this whole, I think the intention from what we've heard tonight, as well as in our prior conversations on this at previous meetings, is that this is all intended to be developed in a similar fashion at some point.
Yeah.
So from Leroy Lane, how far would the southernmost point of this development be?
It's a 660.
It's a 660. Wetland,
That's that pond area.
And wooded.
scrub
It's-
trees.
Yeah, it's got the pond, some scrub trees. It goes up a high bank, and then it goes into a farm field.
And as I listen to my colleagues speak a lot, and they come back to the master plan, and we use the master plan and the future land use a lot in regards to our deliberations and so forth. And I understand what Mr. Beebe said, because I have his piece of paper that he provided us, and I listened to that. I have his 2-page or 3-page paper too. However, that was not adopted, and I understand where he came from with that. But this is what we work with. And so therefore, if I have listened carefully to my colleagues, is this rezoning is in against to what we have placed in our future land use plan in regards to rural buffer, that this area is still considered a rural buffer. And as I look at the zoning map, our current zoning map, this is all residential in this area, whether it's an R3, R2 is nearby, R1, it is still that. So therefore, I'm going to have a real problem with agreeing that this should be a rezone.
I did want to briefly go over with the board, looking at the future land use map and location that we're looking at. So this is the area of the R3A parcel. This is all currently zoned R3A. This is the section of the R3A parcel that is approximately being looked at to be rezoned. The question about how proximity to Leroy Lane, there's that. We have the existing apartments. If you look at the future land use map, again, this is the entire R3A zone property. Although it is all zoned currently R3A, the future land use map, this orange color, is a residential attached, where the future land use map says that this should be specifically what the R3A zone is, a multifamily apartment dwelling. The remainder of the parcel is left at rural buffer. And so the future land use map does not state that although the current zoning of this parcel is R3A, that the entire parcel should be residential attached or should be commercial light industrial. It leaves this section as a rural buffer. And if you look at the rural buffer, how it's described in our future land use map, rural buffer areas generally do not have sewer and water, but as this one has been described, it does have access to utilities, but are appropriate for agricultural, low density, residential, and other uses allowed by zoning. Typically, this buffer is located on the fringe between rural and more urbanized areas. Key sentence, rezoning requests, which is what is placed before us, for more intensive uses should be limited, especially those requiring extended utility service. They don't require extended utility service. The service is already there. When I look at the future land use map for this parcel, ultimately you have to decide where you're going to draw the line. We've drawn the line as what is rural buffer and what is not. But at some point you have to decide, do you want this expansion to be, residential? Do you want it to be expanded business? The future land use map leaves it up for debate. There is an existing B5. If you were to expand it, it is a natural expansion. It is not a spot zone, just the same as if this parcel was B5 and we wanted to expand the residential R3A. It would not be a rezone because you'd be expanding an already existing R3A. So it wouldn't be a spot zone. It's a natural expansion. The utilities are there. So I just wanted to point out that the master plan and the future land use map, if this area were orange, I think you could definitely make the argument that the future land use map does not want this to be business. Similarly, if it was the pinkish salmon color, you could definitely make the argument that the future land use map would not support any kind of residential. But this portion, it's left up as a rural buffer. And if you look at the one thing that's came up before is what is called the growth management boundary. The growth management boundary is pretty close. Let's see. Here's the growth management boundary. This is the section that we're talking about rezoning. And so it's not, although it's just outside of it, it's not as if we're expanding, say, a rezoning further out. This would be a rezoning that would be just on the cusp of that growth management boundary. And again, just because it's outside or inside the growth management boundary, you can still rezone. But if you're looking at, well, this is too far of a stretch of rezoning, it's just outside of that growth management boundary.
May I say something? Thank you, Peter. That helps me with my decision making. But so back to our options, because I still think it's pertinent and we got to move forward. And I appreciate that Tom came forward to help us with our partners that are working with us in Union Township. But we've been trying to get development on the west side a long time. I've been here 28 years, been praying for a grocery store out here after Ashcraft's closed. I hope the developer in this case can fit one into that parcel on the north side now. But and I still think that what was presented to us earlier with the proposal that I think leaving more room for possibly options in the commercial band along the northern part of the property would be very beneficial to Union Township and all the people who live here, which sells me to rezone the southern part of the property as option B, I'll call it. But that helps me to go that route instead of option A. I'm just putting it out there.
Chair.
Yes, please.
I would echo that sentiment. I think, look, at the end of the day here, we're trying to do community planning. We have to satisfy the needs of our developers and our residents alike. I think the applicant has brought us an alternative. I think that I find acceptable. The applicant owns a significant portion of that land and has access to buy more of it. And to me, I think it only makes sense to try to find a compromise that gives us a good opportunity to keep a wide variety of business options open on the B5 on the roadway. I think that this puts it at the furthest distance from our residential concerns in as much as is possible, understanding that it's not optimal for everyone. It's contiguous to our growth boundary, and it's contiguous to the zoning that we're attaching to. So I mean, to me, I think that part of our responsibility is to try to work to find compromise, and I think that this is a reasonable compromise solution, especially considering the fact that just based on the depth and the berm, that it's going to be largely out of sight. It makes sense to me.
I would echo both your comments and also Denise's. I appreciate you going back to the master plan and having those concerns, because I always have that same concern. And so as you were speaking to that, I was agreeing with you. It does help for Peter to explain the way you did. It's a different light than I was thinking of it, because I was in the same perspective you were. But if I were, certainly I'm not looking at the two plans, this is better for the community. I think this latter one. It removes what most people don't want to be next to, kind of away, and it leaves that commercial corridor open for stuff that people do want to see in commercial corridors. I heard the comment about mini storage being nice buildings. Does anybody really think that? That when they look at it, they go, "That's nice architecture." The fact is, they're a necessary element of our community, but they're not attractive, which is why we don't want to see them on our main corridors or in our neighborhoods. And so this is a much better option for me. I'm not sure I'm ready to vote on this yet, but I'm much more open to this proposal than I was the first one.
Well, and I also think that the reality of the situation is that the roadway on both sides of M20 are B5, and in as much as I appreciate the concerns of our local residents, and I'm certainly very supportive of their concerns in terms of property values and whatnot. I mean, there's a reason why those properties are being held as B5, and nobody's petitioning us right now to change it to residential. It's because there is value in developing that as B5. But I think my goal as a planning commissioner is to try to help that resident in terms of how we develop that, and I want to maintain the maximum amount of flexibility on those B5 areas, because even though that's inevitably what it's going to be, I want to make sure that we're at least preserving the opportunity to keep those in keeping with the type of business that I wouldn't mind living next to as a resident of Union Township as well. And I do think this solution helps to address that.
The only problem I have is, and you talk about residential a lot, and again, I would have to go back out and look at that land again, is that we do have residents to the south. And if we're concerned about the residents, then I wouldn't see that any of what has been presented to us is really meeting and thinking about the residents of the area. So I would have to go back out and look at that and spend more time on that piece of property to really understand where we are in regards to the residents. And by the, and I appreciate what Peter said is also, but again, I don't see that this is an area that really is all residential. By just looking at the rural buffer, the future land use, the zoning map, I see residents all over, residential district all over there. So I would struggle with the rezoning.
Brian, and then I'll make a comment.
Thank you. I think the concerns I heard, talking about residences, frontage, these are the reasons I originally voted against the original SUP that was there. I mean, that was the basis of it. It didn't fit, it wasn't harmonious with the character of the area. So I appreciate you bringing those comments back up again regarding residents.
Well, I voted in favor of the last one.
Well, I
so
know.
I'm not going to even speak to that, so I do think that this is the
Yeah.
appropriate place for that, but
Yeah.
that's here or there.
I mean,
because we're not talking about that.
what I would say is that well, let me say this. So a concern I would have is that if we rezone that parcel to the south, that one parcel, I have the impression is far enough away from, for example, the apartment complex and the houses to the south on Lincoln to not interfere with their enjoyment of their property. But then you have this other part that they own that is in limbo right now because that covenant project is not going forward. And one thing that's been observed, and I think it has some validity, is that, you know, eventually it's going to be something else. And I guess I would want to see some sort of understanding. I don't know what form it would take, but I would not, let's put it this way, I would be extremely unhappy if we make that rezone and that project goes forward, and then a year from now, oh, we have this wonderful demand, we need to go east, and we need another set of these to the east, and now we're going to butt up against Arboretum apartments, and we're no longer going to have that buffer. Because that's, I mean, I understand it, that's what developers do. If you have a demand, I swear I don't understand why there's so much storage that's needed, but that's just me. I've lived in the same home for 30 years, so I understand. But anyway, so that's a concern I have. It's sort of similar to what you're saying. It's, you know, what are we going to ultimately end up with? On the other hand, to me, it's a slightly more attractive option than option A. I didn't like option A. I don't really like this one, but it's slightly more palatable. And frankly, we know one or the other is going to happen anyway because they've already said that if whatever we don't approve, they're going to get done. So.
And I agree with the sentiment. I agree with your concern, and I would say the same thing. I think that if we got an application in a year to try to expand mini storage even further closer to either to the east or the south, I'm probably going to have a different opinion of it because now we are starting to encroach.
And I think
that's not in front of us yet.
And I think what I'm saying and what I just said was, I think we need some sort of understanding or something in writing up front that says that they're not going to ask for that, because we know that if they decide they want it, then they'll find a way to get it done, and we won't really have, you know, we won't have any recourse because it's become, you know, the lay of the land, as it were.
Do we? Is there even a process by which we would do that?
The applicant would always have the right to ask for a rezoning of property. I don't think we can restrict them from applying for a rezoning application. But again, when I spoke to the, when you look at, I mean, this picture gives you the best visual, I think. All of this is zoned R3A. This is R3A. The future land use map specifically has residential attached, approximately draw a line straight down, and everything to the east, it wants to be residential attached. So if the applicant were to, or any applicant were to say, well, I want to rezone this portion of R3A to B5 or anything that would not fit in a residential attached, I mean, it's an easy answer of no. The future land use map does not want this to be anything except residential attached. But if you were to imagine a line here, everything to the west is that rural buffer, is that green.
Right.
And so ultimately we have this application in front of us, but if later on the applicant came and said, I want to go further to the east or even just to the south, again, it's a new debate of where do you want to draw the line? You know, are you comfortable with rezoning this much to allow for the intended self-storage units? You could. You could also simply say, but that's where the line is drawn. We don't want any further expansion B5. We want this to remain R3A.
I guess what I'm throwing out there is we can say that, but can we enforce it?
You can say no to rezone request.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
how you
it's
enforce
no
it.
different than if we were to recommend approval of the SUP along M20. There's nothing to stop them from coming back. It just sounds weird.
I see what you're saying.
You know, we can't stop them from coming back and asking for it next year on the south side anyway.
So you're saying we have more intrinsic control over zoning than we do over special use permits, essentially.
So SUPs are subjective, right? Or opinions, harmonious, character.
Yeah, a lot of it is that, based on this criteria.
I just think it's a case of, I mean, and I would say right now that all the planning commissioners here at the table today take their roles very seriously, and I would hope that in the future it's the same way. We're going to take the role seriously when the application is put in front of us, and have a legitimate conversation about what makes sense to do in terms of our community planning. I think it's easy to get caught up in well, what might happen in the future with this parcel or that. At the end of the day, we have to look at what's in front of us, and I do agree with Phil's notion that one of them's going to happen. I mean, it's
So are we ready to take action tonight, or do we need more time to think about it?
I'm going to give it a whirl. I'm going to recommend, I'm going to make a motion to recommend to the board approval of the rezone I'm sorry, I'm looking for my approval of rezone 2019-01. I guess with no contingency, I guess.
Is there a reasoning why? The reason why?
With the rationale that it's connected to it's contiguous to both the existing zoning and it's contiguous to the growth management boundary, being the primary reasons, and it's also preferable in terms of the visibility based on land contour and based on screening. It's preferable to the visibility along the M20 corridor, and finally it leaves, if they pursue this direction instead, it leaves the maximum flexibility and development along the M20 corridor, which we're trying to attract a certain type of business.
And I'll support and make note that it's utilizing the buffer area as intended.
So the motion was by Buckley as stated and seconded by Darren. Further discussion?
The only other thing that I'd point out that I didn't mention is that there are, as mentioned by the applicant, there are utilities in that space as well.
that was actually a helpful reminder for me. So,
Utilities are there, or the utilities are on the boundary?
Utilities have been extended to the boundary line.
To the boundary line, so that actual parcel does not have utilities.
Now, your DPW has a requirement that we extend it to the boundary line. So therefore, that's what was Township.
Right, but the actual parcel
That's not
doesn't,
usually
just
done.
up to the boundary lines, so that if you want to, if something else goes in, you would have to extend the utilities into that parcel.
As you do with all.
yeah,
Right, but
I
I'm
think so.
just, so it's not existing, and so.
I guess the point I was making is
Okay.
we don't have a leapfrog of properties without utility. We have something at the boundary.
Just wanna make sure I understand.
Other comments?
So if we approve this, special uses would have to be forthcoming to move forward with this plan. I mean, I think my biggest concern is, at this point, with that particular part, where we're talking about on the map is Arboretum. I certainly want the opportunity to go and explore that property and look at the property well to make sure that if the SUP comes before us, I know what kind of screening we need to have there.
And
And we would deal with that in the site plan, correct?
In the SUP.
In the, in the SUP.
Because the SUP, we have extra latitude
Right.
for additional screening. And that would be my biggest concern. I think it makes sense to be able to extend this, but I am very concerned about the residences that we see there, and I want to make sure they're protected.
And to that note, I'd love to see a site plan with an elevation from the east showing what the berm height with the tree height in respect to the building height. So what would the person,
We have,
So at this point, you have a motion on the on the table to rezone. So now you're asking that you need more information, so are you ready to either postpone or table this?
I'm thinking out loud.
I mean, I am too, I'm just like,
The
whoa.
purpose of this rezone is stated, it even says in here, for expansion of self-storage building, which implies that they want to do an SUP on it. So because it's stated in there what they want to do for the rezone, why they want the rezone, I had to think through the process of these next steps, that there are going to be the proper steps that we have to protect neighboring properties along the way.
and I am going down that same path because we're trying to help this process through.
Yeah. You want to briefly do what?
Yes, I just wanted to respond to the comment that we completely understand that we will need to submit a new site plan, and we'll be happy to post the elevations on them so that you have that level of detail and understanding.
Mike,
Yeah.
what I can
I
do
think-
is basically cut a cross section so that you see the finished surface grades as it goes across the land and right up to the building. So
That'd be
if
helpful.
that's something that you want included, I can.
Well, I think for those who have trouble visualizing,
Yep.
because we're trying to protect the
Yeah, we got it.
apartment,
Yep.
it helps to visualize.
That's fine, I can do that.
But it's a good point to, you know, the rezone only makes sense, to me anyway, it only makes sense if one is then going to go ahead and ultimately approve the special use permit. Because if you rezone that property B5, then anything in a B5 zone could go in there, and as was pointed out by by one of the public comments, although they aren't the most intrinsically beautiful developments, the self-storage units are quiet and, you know, there's not a lot of commotion associated with them. So there could be other things that could possibly go back in there that might even be, you know, less desirable, I suppose, if it were just sitting out there as a B5. So.
Right, because once we rezone, then
Yeah, right.
McDonald's could go back there.
Yeah, it becomes like the property out on Broomfield again. So there is a motion on the floor, it's been seconded. And as was pointed out, we have, you know, We will see a special use application, we will see a new site plan, have opportunities to have input on the site plan, can put conditions on the SUP with respect to screening and other sorts of things. So, other discussion? Like I said, I have reservations about this. This isn't my favorite idea, but I believe one of these two is going to happen, and I think this may be the less, ultimately the less unattractive one.
Can I call for the question?
Are we ready to vote? So the motion is to recommend approval of a rezone request 2019-01 to the Township Board. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Motion carried, 5 votes to 1.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Are we getting better?
That's the point.
And we're not done with this. We're done with it for tonight, but we're not done with this, obviously. Other business, I didn't hear that we had other business. Extended public comment, if there's anybody who hasn't said enough already. Portion of the meeting where individuals are invited to address the Planning Commission on any item, whether it was on tonight's agenda or not. Give us your name and address for the minutes. Limit your comments to 5 minutes in this case. Extended public comments open at 10:31. And hearing none, we'll go ahead and close that back up. Final board comment. Comments from board members?
I don't know what to say that I do appreciate everybody's thoughtful input on this process. I know that you know, this isn't easy, and it can be a tough job sometimes, but I do appreciate the thought and the effort that people put into this sort of decision making when we have issues like tonight.
I agree with that. I don't want to keep us here a long time, but you had an hour and a half this afternoon with what's his name, the new guy?
Christopher Dusen.
Christopher, are you happy with him?
I mean,
I'm
yeah,
putting you on the spot, but
no,
it
an
was
initial
a good constructive meeting, and you think he's ready to go. And
yes, no, and as he had stated, he has many years of experience. Spending the hour and a half with him, it shows.
Mm-hmm.
We are getting someone who this is definitely not their first rodeo, or maybe even their 10th. So I'm impressed.
Okay, very good.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Did he, as a project manager, was he in agreement with the previous project manager on the schedule, on how he felt we should move forward going through these board items?
Yeah, and I can just update you guys that after we had met with, when Mike was here and he had talked about maybe bringing a section at a time, I had talked with Mike afterwards and looking at what was approved in our agreement with McKenna that the township approved. We have a limited number of meetings, and so the schedule that Mike and I were looking at, and I discussed that with Chris, and he's in agreement that we'll do that, is the agreement called for separating the ordinance into 3 parts. And with each part, and that part will contain more than one section of the ordinance. And so we'll imagine dividing the, I think, 32, 33 sections into 3 parts. When each part is done, we will review that part at a meeting. And so we'll review part 1, part 2, part 3. That'll take 3 meetings. A 4th meeting will be to review the sum of those parts altogether. After we have individually reviewed those parts, we will take 1 meeting to review the sum of the parts, the entirety, the whole draft. A 5th meeting would be used to then, once we have individually reviewed those parts, reviewed the parts as a whole, we would then invite the other boards that we had at our kickoff, the EDA, the ZBA, the, any and all boards, Board of Trustees, an opportunity to come and give their input on the collection of all those parts. There is, and we'll have to play it by ear to see how much it is. We're not sure if dividing the ordinance into those 3 parts, there could be, and not all parts will be equal, and so it could be that there's a lot of information in one part, it's just too much. And so we have an additional meeting that we're saving, so to speak, lack of a better term, in our back pocket, that if we do need to break the ordinance up into 4 meetings, we can do that. So we'll see after the first part goes, if that seemed like it was too much, we need to slow it down. And so that's what we'll be going through. As Chris will be working on, I guess, part 1, when he's done and ready, I let him know that we wanted to have at least a week, preferably maybe even 2 weeks before we meet.
Please.
So he will let me know when he's done or about done, and then we can look to scheduling, or when he anticipates to be done, scheduling a meeting a couple weeks after that point, because he'll email me that part, I'll get it to you guys, and that'll give you a couple weeks to look at it. We'll meet, you'll give all your input to him on that part, he'll take it back, and then he'll start working on part 2. So that's what and at this point I don't know when he's going to be done with part 1, so we'll see.
So it sounds very similar to what we agreed upon early on with,
Mike Dean.
Yeah. I think at one point Mike was looking at just doing a few sections at a time of the ordinance.
Yes.
And then when we looked at, well, if we do it that slowly, it's going to require a lot of meetings, so.
thank you.
Brian?
Quick question, and this came up because of what was before us tonight. As I was going through the master plan, getting to the future land use in the particular property that we were looking at tonight, listed as commercial/light industrial. My recollection, and maybe it's wrong, I'm asking for memory here, was we took out the word light industrial. We changed that.
Mm-hmm.
This
Yeah.
is not the master plan that we approved. Those changes aren't in here.
I would agree with that.
I would agree
It's-
too.
Because that was contention for the applicant tonight, say, no, it says industrial.
And
We didn't want it being misused in
And
that
we
way.
had a point, I could go back to the tape and listen to it. We had an issue that we discussed here where we said we want the reference to industrial removed there because it gives the wrong impression.
And it got used but in the wrong way tonight.
And it was misapplied, but I think in spirit it was misapplied, but they're going by what's in the plan.
Right.
So I agree.
And the other thing, which I continue to have trouble with is these colors, is as I look at the definitions that I see on page 24, and then go to page 25, in the categories, there is no community commercial.
Yeah,
Is that supposed to be community commercial?
Community commercial was changed, and it looks like there wasn't aligned the retail service.
Right.
So,
There's something missing.
well, and at one point, community commercial was what retail service was called, and it was changed to retail service, but I can see that.
Yes, so I would agree.
Yeah.
I keep looking at
Yeah.
that, I'm like, okay,
Well,
I'm missing something.
Right, and we changed that, and that's why I thought the next one, I think we just said, let's just call it commercial.
Is it possible that there's a later version somewhere?
I went to the website today to look at it, because as I was reviewing, I'm like, I thought we changed that. So I went to the website and downloaded the current version, which is probably what you were looking at up here, right?
Yeah, and so what I can do is I can look back and see. I believe it was a January or December meeting that we made a laundry list of changes. I believe the future land use categories are what they were changed to, and the future land use map is the one that's out of date. Because the neighborhood service, because if you look at on page 24 and 25, just as the chart or the legend, it goes in order. The first one in the legend is rural preservation. The first one on page 25 is rural preservation.
Right.
So if you go down the order, once you get down past neighborhood services, the map legend says community commercial, which I believe is what originally it was called, and then it was changed to retail service. Underneath that one, originally it was called commercial/industrial mix, and I believe the change was made to commercial/light industrial, but I can double check to see if there was a third version that maybe was not caught.
Because we also changed, in this particular one, we changed the language of the paragraph in that too.
And again, I can just check, and I'll I can once I find I can send copy of those minutes to everyone so you can look for yourselves.
You were there too.
And if it changed, then we need to change our, the
And you get it reflected with the current version.
yes. Okay.
Thank you.
Before you adjourn, I'm sorry, I'm not used to the ending of these meetings. I don't know if you would consider letting me do one more public comment, because I missed that part.
Brief, I guess, yeah.
Okay.
We want to hear from you.
Just, since this was passed, I just wanted to mention that there was quite a lack of screening that was put up in this original thing that had, because that road that goes in right by the apartments, I mean, you can drive by there and you can see right into the apartments. There was like no screening. I mean, there's a few deciduous trees. That was it. So with your, the proposal coming back, I think the screening is very important, not just around the building, but it's gonna create, there's gonna be more traffic coming in with the addition of more mini storage. I think there should be some screening right next by that. So
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think when we approved that original site plan, we talked about
trying to screen
along
the
that
road.
specifically that I think you're referring to block the traffic that goes along by the Arboretum apartments.
But I don't know if we were, because we
Well, technically, a
recommended,
B5 has to screen against an R for residential by code.
but because we recommended not to approve the special use, from our position at least, I thought that it was discussed and requested, but I thought it was determined that we didn't have the right to put screening there, or right to require it at least. I'm not sure.
But I thought it was on the part we did approve, which was the SPR, because we do have a right to require, in fact, ordinance requires screening abutting residential, B5. I mean, that's part of the ordinance. So it's not, at the SUP, we might have done something more with.
Well, if it were up to me, I'd have them plant trees on the whole property and just cut them down as they needed to, so.
Peter, have you had issues with this? You know what we're referring to? The screening along the south side of this property that abuts Arboretum Apartments?
South side of.
Because I do remember discussion about putting additional screening there. They do have trees, but that's not screening.
Yeah,
It
I
seems
think
like
we
wouldn't have missed that when it comes to an SPR.
Well, it's I think here's the catch.
While we're waiting, and to your point, we will address the screening very well between
I
them.
hope so, because that other meeting, when that all happened, it was, I think, even midnight.
It was.
And it all went down so fast, it was like boom, boom, and it's like, I think that got missed.
Well, this is definitely on our radar.
If we can put that on this, make it more proper screening there, we would greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And more comment while Pete's looking. The whole lighting of that LED billboard was governed by the state on the brightness.
Thank you. I took notes on this.
I was tired of arguing it with the gentleman who was telling me that we don't control the illumination of billboards.
Don't they own it?
It's done by, regulate, sorry, thank you for the, it's done by the state. Yet, they're arguing that they're doing something about it, but yet it should be, and maybe, I mean, I don't know how much experience we're getting with this, but obviously, if it's regulated by the state, we should be able to make a phone call.
Yeah.
Well, that would pertain to the advertising as well,
Yeah.
which is, I mean, they own the billboard.
illegal
It's,
to-
I agree with that.
Can't advertise your own
And I watch
business.
it every time I go by there, and I watch the dirt pile, and again, they've always worked well with us. I was having trouble, right? These are off, right? I was having trouble with keeping.
Yeah, we haven't adjourned yet.
Yeah, I'm not finding it exactly at, but if I remember the rule, it was basically they're not abutting because of the road there, whether it's public or private, they're abutting the road, and then they're not abutting residential property. So it'd be the same thing as, that private road is, Lincoln Road or Remus Road. You're not, so it's you're not directly, but you're there's a road in between the two of you.
I mean, I remember.
But I remember them saying, but we'll put it in anyways.
Oh.
Saying and writing.
Oh, I know. I wonder if that's if it was written down in the signed site plans.
I mean, I think we're all in agreement that screening, when a special use request comes for this parcel, whenever it comes, that screening is a very important issue.
We'll build the wall.
Hopefully they've gotten that
Sorry.
message as well. I think they have gotten that message about screening.
I agree, it's in our control. We can ask. Not in favor.
Adjournment?
Yeah, so see everybody in February. Look forward to it.
Awesome. Thanks. By the way, I'll second Ryan's comments about, I appreciate